Alien dreaming. The enigma of the Archons. Human beings are on a journey of awareness, which has been momentarily interrupted by extraneous forces. Carlos Castaneda, Magical Passes. In the high strangeness of the Gnostic materials, the strangest factor of all is certainly the presence of the Archons. Here we confront an enigma of cosmic proportions. Where do we situate these weird entities in the evolutionary plot of the Gaia mythos? Are they to be regarded as real entities, a species in their own right, albeit a non-terrestrial one? What is their relation to Gaia, the intelligence of the biosphere? And how do the Archons in turn relate to humanity? Non-ordinary reason. Gnostics explored these questions in a sober and consistent way, but to follow in their tracks we must first observe a caveat: do not expect the inquiry into the Archons to be rational. At least not in the ordinary sense of rationality. Aristotle stated that the mark of a mature mind is to entertain an idea without accepting it, without buying it, as we say today. I am not insisting that anyone buy the Archon theory of Gnosticism. I propose that we examine and sample it, that's all. Skepticism is essential when it comes to the enigma of the Archons. This inquiry calls for application of a special faculty that might be called non-ordinary reason. What this is can be illustrated by a Woody Allen joke from the film Manhattan. A man comes to a psychiatrist in behalf of his brother who suffers the affliction of believing he is a chicken, and behaving accordingly. It's terrible to see, doctor. The way he goes around clucking and scratching. The family is going through hell with this. What can you do? Can psychiatry help my brother? The doctor responds that certainly it can. Even in advanced delusions like this, therapy can often bring the patient back to reality, the doctor assures him. I am willing to work with your brother, to do whatever it takes. It will be a long haul, though. Assuming that the man is encouraged, the psychiatrist consults his agenda. When can you bring your brother in for the first session? He asks. Suddenly the man furrows his brow. Sorry, doc. I'd like to, but I can't do that. I really can't. We need the eggs. The man's response is entirely rational within the context of his imagination. When Trekkies, devotees of the cult TV series, Star Trek, avidly discuss characters and events in the series, they are using non-ordinary reason. The Pokemon card trading phenomena triggered an explosion of non-ordinary reason in which children had to recite in rigorous detail the behaviors and traits specific to over 100 different entities. In Internet MMORPGs, massive multiplayer online role-playing games, players assume fictional identities that must behave in consistent way, exhibiting a kind of virtual rationality. The reasoning involved in such role-playing is rigorous, for players cannot cause their avatars to do anything they like. The avatars must have specific codes of behavior. Developing and maintaining such codes involves non-ordinary reason. In effect, non-ordinary reason is just like ordinary reason, except that its subject matter is imagined rather than perceived. Gnostic seers had to be skilled in non-ordinary reason to interpret the experiences they underwent in states of heightened perception. Not everything in the cosmos or in the human psyche can be reduced to rational terms, of course, and that in any case is not the point of non-ordinary reasoning. The point is, to bring sane and sober understanding to aspects of human experience that lie beyond the limits of ordinary sense perception. This essay treats the Archons in the context of the imaginal exercise proposed in Coco de Mer, our participation in Gaia's dreaming. What we learn about these entities, and ourselves in relation to them, will involve non-ordinary reason, but it will not be irrational nonsense. Contemplating the Archons is not an exercise in fantasy or a game of make-believe. Far from it. If the Gnostics were right, it is primarily by detecting how the Archons work that we can know our own minds work, and claim the sovereign power of intelligence endowed in us by Sophia. Fractal visions. The Archons may be regarded as progeny of Sophia, but not in the same sense as species born and sustained in Gaia's womb, the terrestrial biosphere. In fact, they are called Archons, from the Greek archai, primordial, first, antecedent in time, because they arise in the planetary system before Earth was formed into a habitat for life. Sophia's unilateral dreaming produced a power surge from the cosmic center, and the goddess, shooting forth like a torrential current, impacted the inert fields of primordial matter in an unusual way. Gnostic texts use the term, aborted fetus, to describe the results of this impact. A veil exists between the world above, and the realms that are below, and shadow came into being beneath the veil. Some of the shadow became matter, and was projected apart. And what Sophia created became a product in the matter, like an aborted fetus. The hypostasis of the Archons, 94, 515. To the Coco de Mer icon we can now add a graphic variation to suggest how the Archons emerge from Sophia's dreaming, like a leak from a placenta. As explained in the preceding essay of this trilogy, the Coco de Mer with cosmic detailing represents the trimorphic protenoia, the original three-body world of Sophia's dreaming. Our world, the terrestrial biosphere coupled with the sun and the moon, is the manifestation of this dreaming. With the arising of the Archons, another dreaming comes into play outside our threefold world order. I propose to call this the alien dreaming. This choice of language will become self-evident as we proceed. This other dreaming is a spin-off of Sophia's power of emanation, an exotic spill, yet it does not impede or arrest her original dreaming. The Gaia mythos describes how the impact of the Aeon Sophia upon the density of atomic matter produced a massive fracture, like the shatter pattern on an ice pond. The pattern has a center where Sophia is located, identified by the Mandelbrot set, and a spider web extension of fracture lines that run in all directions, the frozen sea of fractal waves. Episode 9 describes how Sophia, situated in the center of the impact zone, sees around her something like a sea of tensile waves, and riding the waves, or actually composing the waves they appear to ride, are self-repeating forms that resemble seahorses. These seahorses are similar to the forms that appear at high reiteration of the equation for the Mandelbrot set. These forms correspond to the anatomical type spontaneously generated from formless atomic matter by Sophia's impact, a type called the shadow body, Hybs in Coptic. A word on fractals. Although fractal-like patterns appear in nature, in ferns, for instance, the disposition of the leaves on a stem is repeated in the form of the stemmed branches. The self-similar forms produced by high iteration are not natural, strictly speaking. Fractals such as those pictured here result from feeding a mathematical formula into a computer and having the formula reprocess itself, over and over again. However, the forms so produced do resemble the famous Paisley, seen by many people who took LSD in the 1960s. I would argue, first, that fractals are consistently seen in altered states, and second, that the patterns thus seen may also represent real, though supernatural processes in the cosmos at large. The fractal formations described in the Gaia mythos episodes 9-10 are actual physical phenomena that occur spontaneously when an aeon, a mass-free, high-porosity current of stellar plasma pours into the dense fields of elementary matter. At first these, fractal seahorses, seem to be inanimate structures, rigid and almost crystalline in nature, but by the very fact that Sophia beholds them, they become animated. In the second stage of the unfoldment described in Trimorphic Protenoia, the Aeon Sophia descends to empower her fallen members by giving them spirit or breath. NHLE 1996, p. 511. Thus the tensile forms morph from semi-rigid seahorses into rounded fetal forms with tails, but the tails, it seems, keep falling off and turning into other embryos. By this bizarre process of self-repeating generation, the neonate horde of the Archons emerges. E.T. Archon Navigator. The Lord Archon. The hypostasis of the Archons describes a further development that follows the initial emergence of the fetal archontic entities. In the passage cited here, I apply some concepts drawn from modern astronomy to develop a more vivid picture of events presumably observed by Gnostic seers in the cosmos at large. A veil exists between the world above, in the galactic core, and the realms that are below, exterior, in the galactic limbs, and shadow came into being beneath the veil. Some of the shadow dark mass became atomic matter, and was projected apart, partially formed into elementary arrays, the dema. And what Sophia created by her impact became a product in the matter, the dema, a neonate form like an aborted fetus. And once formed, it assumed a plastic shape molded out of shadow, and became an arrogant beast resembling a lion. It was androgynous, because it was from neutral, inorganic matter that it derived. The hypostasis of the Archons, 2, 4, 93, 30 ff, with my glosses in brackets. A close reading reveals a crucial detail. After the initial formation of the embryonic Archon types, a second variant of shadow body arises, with distinct characteristics of its own. The hypostasis of the Archons describes it as an arrogant beast resembling a lion, but this creature is also described, in another cosmological text, the Apocryphon of John chapter 10 verse 5, as a serpentine body, dracon, with a lion-like face. Thus there are two distinct types of Archons, a fetal or embryonic type, and a draconic or reptilian type. In the hypostasis of the Archons, 93-30-94-5, a supplicant asks the great angel Alelith, "Teach me about the faculty of the Archons, how did they come into being, and by what kind of genesis, of what material, and who created them and produced their force?" The teachings given in response to this question were precise and detailed. Two distinct variants of the Archon type are indicated, and their behaviors are also specified. Another cosmological treatise, the Tripartite Tractate, states that the two orders of Archons assaulted one another, fighting for command because of their manner of being. 84-515. Due to the two distinct stages of their generation, the Archons are invested with an aggressive and divisive nature, fighting among their own ranks. The problem is provisionally resolved, however, when the reptilian type assumes dominance over the massive horde of neonates, and, indeed, over the entire realm of the Dema affected by Sophia's plunge. Opening his eyes, he, the draconic Archon, saw a vast quantity of matter without limit, spread through the galactic limbs, and he became arrogant, saying, "It is I who am God, the sole deity of these regions, and there is no other apart from me." Hype Arch, 94-20. While the neonate Archons are inert, their forms arrested at a premature stage of development, the reptilian leader is aggressive, territorial, and charged with demonic powers. For one thing, he is a formidable shapeshifter. Ealdabaoth had a multitude of faces more than all of them, so that he could put a face before all of them, according to his desire. He shared his fire with them, therefore he became lord over them. Because of power of the glory he possessed of his mother's light, he called himself God. And he did not obey the place from which he came. The Apocryphon of John, 11:35-12:10. The declaration of the chief Archon that he is the only God in the cosmos is, needless to say, a defining moment in Gnostic cosmology, if not in human evolution as well. All the cosmological texts describe this event, with slight variations. Gnostics were insistent on the identification of Ealdabaoth with Yahweh or Jehovah, the tribal god of the Hebrews. This deity is not only blind, but witless and insane. Hypostasis of the Archons 89-24-25. To Gnostics, insanity is not so much unsoundness of mind as the consequence of failure to correct mental errors. The mentality of the Archons cannot be rectified, and, what's worse, the archontic nature is not capable of development. Gilhus, The Nature of the Archons, page 40. Due to the manner of their generation, Archons have no enoia, no innate intentionality. Theirs is an alien dreaming, set apart from the biosphere, the intelligent life field of Gaia. The concept of a god who is both void of willpower and insane is apparently unique to Gnosticism. Needless to say, when Gnostics expressed their views on the identity of Jehovah to devout Jews and to Christians who also revered the Jewish Father God, they were not well received. The Apocryphon of John adds crucial details to the Archon scenario. For one thing, it presents a rare instance where Sophia is actually called the mother of the Archons. It also says of the chief Archon that, he did not obey the place from which he came. This is a telling detail. The fact that the chief Archon moves away from the places where he arose indicates a key concern of Gnostics: the boundary-violating tendencies of the Archons. From the outset they are an invasive species. The draconic Archon is said to be blind, Coptic bile, so he does not see either the Pleroma or Sophia. blindness of the spiritual world characterizes the Archons. Gilhus, page 17. He is called Samael and Saklas. Samael is Hebrew and Saklas is Aramaic for blind one. Understanding the blindness of the Archons is crucially important to our detection of how they can affect humanity. Alias Jehovah. The chief of the Archons is also called the Lord Archon. He is also given the bizarre name, Yaldabaoth, pronounced Yal-da-bi-ot. Scholars disagree on what this name might mean, and how it was derived. By one translation it means, the child who crosses space. By another, it means, chief of the horde. Jarl Eagle Fossum, The Name of God and the Angel of the Lord, page 332–6. Thus it seems to slur together allusions to both types of Archons. In the Old Testament the title Yhwh Sabaoth, Yahweh Sabaoth, occurs 276 times as the title of the Father God. Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, page 155, Gershom Scholem, preeminent scholar of the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, explained Yaldabaoth as a compound of the Aramaic active participle yald, i.e., to beget, and the name Abath, which represents an abridged form of the name Sabaoth. Thus, Yaldabaoth means the begetter of Sabaoth. Nathaniel Deutsch, The Gnostic Imagination, page 55, and there are half a dozen more interpretations. It is likely that the name Yaldabaoth is simply a variant of Jehovah, the paternal father god of the Hebrews. Gnostics identified Jehovah with the Lord Archon and rejected the OT and the entire Judaic plan for salvation as a subterfuge of the Archons. It makes sense that they would have used the same term used by Jews to expose the true nature of the Jewish deity. When it came to knowledge that they considered crucial to human survival, and to humanity's coevolution with Sophia, Gnostics could be confrontational, and totally unconcerned about whom they might offend. Their uncompromising and sometimes scornful attitude, combined with their failure to anticipate the high degree of physical violence that would be triggered by their challenge to Judeo-Christian beliefs, undoubtedly fueled the vicious fanaticism that destroyed the mysteries. Magnification of the fractal Archon generation presents a graphic image that seems to fit the scenario described by Gnostic seers. The embryonic type, or neonate Archon, is clearly defined, but so is another entity, the reptilian Archon with its avaricious jaw and long spermatic tail. This arrogant beast seems to lunge at the entrails of the embryonic type. Right at the point where the embryonic Archon would have a nurturing umbilicus, the reptilians move in invasively. The neonate Archon remains passive, apparently sucking its finger or thumb. Something odd is happening in the lower part of the neonate's body, for its seahorse tail is precariously jointed to the torso. The embryonic type remains self-absorbed, but reacts to the aggression of the other type by dropping its tail, as frightened reptiles do. We wonder if the disjointed tail will form another neonate, or another reptilian. The reptilian form does appear to be fractally repeated in the tail structure of the embryonic type, as if the tail broke off and became an entity of its own, rather than another embryo. The element of fear figures largely in the behavior of the Archons and their effect on humanity. In the Old Testament, fear of God is held to be one of the primary marks of religious experience. The possibility that human fear is a kind of nutriment for certain invasive extraterrestrials has been widely argued in the ET/UFO debate. The second treatise of the Great Seth says that the agenda of the Archons is fear and slavery. The Archons wish to keep humankind under the constraint of fear and worry. NHLE 1990, page 367. Other passages also warn against the Archons' use of fear as a psychological weapon. In another striking detail, the reptilian type seems to be holding a sphere in its jaws, recalling the mythical image of a serpent who offers forbidden fruit, for instance, the serpent in the Garden of Hyperborea with the golden apple in its mouth. Is the neonate eating from this rounded fruit? Gnostics had their own version of what transpired in the Garden of Eden, events in which the Archons were deeply involved, and so it is perhaps not surprising to see hints of the paradise scenario at this primal stage of cosmic activity. All this activity in the fractal generation of the Archons is imaginal, but it is not imaginary, i.e., not purely made up in our minds. recreating what Gnostic seers observed as a sober use of imagination, not a flight into make-believe. It takes non-ordinary reason to describe what is happening here, but the scenario so developed is entirely reasonable and coherent on its own terms. Fetal conflict. However, the Gnostic seers of the mysteries came to imagine the generation of the Archons, the high-iteration fractals around the Mandelbrot set fit their scenario in an uncanny manner. And they do more as well, for the fractal embryos and reptilians also mimic features of human gestation, or vice versa. In human conception, the embryonic sac consists of two parts, the yolk sac, 4 in the illustration below, and the fetal mass attached to it, 1, suspended in amniotic fluid, 2. At the moment the developing embryo gains initial anatomical definition, it is fish-like, a fact that medical science likes to use to remind us of our pre-human origins. It has a distinct head, and a tail, and a third feature, the umbilicus that connects it to the yolk sac through which it is fed. The fractal generation of the Archons exhibits all these features in a clear and precise manner. As the embryo grows, the yolk sac, 4, contracts, and there is at the same time a secondary development. Also connected to the umbilicus is the allantois, 5, a vesicle that fills the interspace between the amnion, 3, and the chorion, 7, the outermost boundary of the entire placental sac. A kind of morphological tension plays between these evolving structures. For the allantois to grow, it must contract or press back, repress, the yolk sac that feeds the growing fetus. Unless the allantois grows in this manner, the protective placenta cannot be fully matured. A similar tension pertains between the embryonic Archons and the reptilians. Just as embryonic development in humans is divided between the growth of the fetus fed from the yolk sac, and the repression of the yolk sac to produce the full-grown placenta from the allantois membrane, the power of the Archons is divided by the nature of their generation. Because of their manner of being, cited above, this conflict is partially resolved when the reptilian type assumes dominance over the massive horde of neonates. Gnostics certainly knew what an aborted fetus looks like. Morally opposed to biological procreation by humans, they were known to practice birth control, and must have assisted others to do so. They would have known from direct observation that the fetus aborted at an advanced stage of gestation does not resemble a half-baked omelette, it has the vestiges of anatomical form. Their choice of this bizarre metaphor must have been intentional, reflecting the occult perception that Archon anatomy mimics the neonate form of humans. Such a metaphor is extremely valuable, not only because it allows us to visualize what Gnostic seers detected by extrasensory perception, but also because it establishes a close tie between the human species on Earth and the pre-terrestrial Archons. For more on this tie, see the closing passage, Cosmic Cousins. The serpent power. The description of a lion-headed serpent for the Ealdabaoth is arresting. For Gnostics, the lion represented the blind force of procreation, an association that probably stems from Egyptian mystery schools, not to mention observation of the force and noise of lions mating in the desert, so the sperm-like body of the lion-headed reptilians is even more appropriate. This draconic type of Archon appears on Gnostic germs, not because the Gnostics worshipped the reptilians, far from it, but because they viewed the image as a magical antidote to Archontic influence. Rather in the way a skull on a label indicates a poisonous liquid, thus preventing us from mistaking it for a liquid that is safe to drink, the lion-serpent image was represented on Gnostic amulets to ward off Archontic intrusion. The lion-headed serpent of the Gnostics is called by magical names such as Ophis, Nuphis, and Abrasix. In the occult anatomy of Asian mysticism and yoga, this reptile is known as Kundalini, the serpent power. Gnostics who practiced Kundalini yoga were called Ophites, from the Greek ophis, snake. This cult was condemned by early Christians as pagan snake worshippers. To the mundane and uninitiated mind, the Kundalini serpent can only be conceived by crude literalization. To Gnostics, the lion-headed serpent crowned with solar rays was not only the image of the Lord Archon, but also of the source of spiritual power that allows human beings to resist that entity. Experts who do not look outside Gnosticism to understand it never mention Kundalini, but unorthodox and esoteric scholars such as G.R.S. Mead, Helena Blavatsky, and C.W. King, Gnostics and their remains, make the connection routinely, as do comparative mythologists such as Joseph Campbell and Alain Danielou. In The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, Campbell shows how the image of Kundalini, the serpent power, appears in world art from the Indus Valley circa 2300 BCE and continues right across the spectrum of ancient cultures, well down into the Common Era. As late as the 16th century, golden thalers in Germany, Campbell, Figure 8, showed the crucifixion on one face and a serpent draped over the cross on the other. At that late date, Christ would have been identified with Kundalini, without an inkling of why, however, but to Gnostics the snake on the cross was a cancellation of the saving power attributed to crucifixion, i.e., the glorification of suffering as a redemptive force. Arousal of Kundalini produces ecstasy, triggers superconsciousness, opens the occult faculties, and releases waves of healing energy that flush physiological and hormonal secretions through the body. As the mythical serpent guarding the tree of knowledge in Genesis, Kundalini was the messenger of salvation for Gnostics. In a complete reversal of the usual reading of the fall, Gnostics regarded the serpent as a spiritual ally to primal humanity, the first to attempt to release mankind from bondage to an unknowing God who had identified himself with the Absolute and thus blocked the way to the tree of eternal life. Campbell, page 78, the unknowing God, who falsely identified himself with the Absolute as of course Yaldabaoth, alias Jehovah. Gnostics taught that nous, the spiritual intelligence endowed in humanity, could be blocked by the Archons. This occurs through archontic intrusion affected by a kind of subliminal invasion at the level of thought and language, i.e., mental syntax. But nous could be reinforced through accessing the power of Kundalini, an ecstatic current that normally rests dormant in the human body. In his monograph on the Archons, I.S. Gilhus notes that the erotic strategy is the most important means used by the Pneumatics to save the lost light. Page 51, Pneumatics is the Gnostic terms for humans who pursue the path of psychosomatic illumination, the key method of Gnostic religion. Pneuma, spiritual force, is developed by cultivation of nous, higher intelligence. But the Archons present a blind field of resistance to this process. In short, they rely on humans remaining ignorant of their inherent spiritual potential. When Kundalini is raised from its dormant state, higher intelligence blossoms, and there are other effects as well. Gnostic sects such as the Ophites practiced the communal raising of Kundalini to produce an protective envelope against archontic intrusion. In effect, they held Kundalini, the sexual spiritual energy locked in the body structure, to be the main instrument of defense against the Archons. The Dialogue of the Savior, NHC 3, 585 contains this exchange. Judas said, "Behold, the authorities Archons dwell above us, Sid is they who will rule over us." The Savior said, "It is you who will rule over them. But only when you rid yourselves of jealousy, and take on the protection of the light, and enter the nymphant bridal chamber." The Savior teacher is emphatic that we have power over the Archons, but he also makes it clear that some human failings impede the use of our power. The Greek word thonos may be translated as jealousy or envy. Gnostics considered envy to be the signature of the Archons, as well as the key human failing that makes us vulnerable to their intrusion. The protection of the light comes through activated Kundalini, often described as a lightning-like tide of electrified light that pours through the body. Nymphin is a code word for the ambient cell of psychophysical protection generated by high levels of Kundalini. Sir John Woodruff, the great transmitter of Hindu tantric wisdom to the West, directly identified the practice of Kundalini yoga raising the serpent power through the channels of the spine with Gnostic rites of serpent worship. Buddhist scholars such as E. A. Evans Wentz, J. M. Reynolds, and H. V. Gunther have made similar observations, but Gnostic scholars have not reciprocated because they do not look outside their genre to understand the theory and practice of Gnosis. The lion-serpent image is displayed over and over in hieroglyphic form on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, 40 miles south of Nag Hammadi. In the cult of Hathor celebrated there, the lion-serpent represented the royal seed of the pharaohs. The royal child Horus is often depicted in a finger-sucking gesture that vividly recalls the posture of the embryonic Archons. Did Egyptian priests who directed the breeding of the dynastic families have intimate knowledge of Kundalini, as well as the Archons? The Kundalini serpent is displayed in Egyptian sacred art by a standing cobra, or a pair of cobras, sometimes wound on a staff, and by the uraeus, the cobra headdress of divine empowerment. The ceremonial braid on the side of Horus' head was yet another indication of the serpent power. The pharaonic braid, traditionally worn on the right side of the head, visually repeats the form of the spermatic cobras of Edfu. The sacred iconography carries explicit, but highly occult knowledge. Horus is the child whose right brain cerebral functions are heightened by the serpent power. The esoteric imagery of the serpent power operates at several levels at once. We shall see that the complex biological symbolism of Gnostic myth has much to teach us about the nature of the Archons, as well as how we can resist them. The rape of Eve. Ildabad is also called the Archiganter, the master breeder. Epoch John II, 1225 Gnostics, to whom ethics must be consistent with cosmology, regarded biological procreation, insofar as it is an involuntary act, as a mindless mechanism that makes humans accessory to the head Archon. How Ildabad breeds his own type, and controls the breeding of the embryotypes, and may even be involved in interbreeding with humans, are some of the more baffling elements in the Sophia mythos. Several texts in the NHC describe the Archons' attempt to rape Eve, i.e., inseminate the human species. The texts make it clear, however, that they do not succeed in their aims. The hypostasis of the Archons describes this episode. Then the Archons approached Adam. And when they saw his female counterpart speaking with him, they became greatly agitated and in arousal for her. They said to one another, "Come, let us sow our seed in her," and they pursued her. And she, the mother of the living, laughed at them for their witlessness and blindness, and in their clutches she turned into a tree, and left before them her shadowy reflection resembling herself. 89, 15-20. This passage demonstrates the imaginal sophistication of Gnostic vision. Gnostic seers discerned the Archons' attempt to inseminate Eve, to interfere in the genetics of the human species, if you will, but they also observed that the attempt was a failure. The metamorphosis of Eve into a tree recalls the Greek myth of Daphne who turned into a laurel. This parallel shows that Gnostic cosmo-mythology was not a fluke, but a system of visionary knowledge deeply rooted in the indigenous mind of pre-Christian Europe. For Gnostics, the visions they beheld in altered states were empirically true and could be tested. By doing so, they were able to develop extraordinary insight into the superhuman worlds, the activities of the gods, the relation of humanity to alien species, and the long-term experience of the human species. The above scenario describes how the Archons failed to capture Eve, yet they somehow engage her shadow, a mere reflection. This implies that although the Archons cannot access our genetic structure, they may affect or distort our image of woman, of the feminine, and in that sense they really can succeed in defiling Eve. They may distort our sense of our own genetic makeup. As it so often does, Gnostic insight into cosmic order challenges us to understand what is happening in our own minds. Is there some way in which we humans have defiled the image of woman? For instance, by imposing on women an artificial notion of identity, a falsification of their true nature. If so, we would be regarded by Gnostics as accessory to the rape of Eve by the Archons. Is there evidence in the world today that we have a distorted view of genetics? If so, this distortion, and the actions that proceed from it, would fully merit being regarded as consequences of the Archons' deviating effect on human behavior. Enter the Anunnaki. The above passage from the hypostasis of the Archons calls to mind current scenarios of alien intervention in human genetics. Most theories of the ET breeding program assume that whatever the aliens, usually, the embryonic gray types are suspect, might choose to do, they can do. But Gnostic seers who applied non-ordinary reasoning to their observations of the Archons reached a different conclusion. In the Gnostic view, it would be a huge error to assume the Archons are doing things they cannot do, for that would give them power over us. Gnostics taught that the main danger we face with the Archons lies less in what they can actually do than in what we falsely believe they can do. Their trump card is deceit, a pattern and plain in Greek, especially deceit about the nature and extent of their powers. For their delight is bitter, and their beauty is depraved. Their pleasure is in deception. The Apocryphon of John BG 56, 3-7. Strange as they are, certain elements in the Gnostic mythos of our species may now begin to look familiar. The theme of alien insemination of the human race also occurs in archaic narratives from ancient Sumeria, dating to the 3rd millennium BCE, and it is rampant in contemporary UFO lore. Sumerian accounts describe an alien species called the Anunnaki, who are credited with producing the human species by genetic engineering, and also with inaugurating civilization. These narratives are found on cuneiform tablets dating to circa 1800 BCE, but they preserve late redactions of much earlier versions. Apparently, the story about alien intervention is one of the oldest scripts of our species. Many people who follow the UFO debate are aware of the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, who are easily equated with modern-day ETs, but there is a total absence of reference to the Gnostic scenario of the Archons in the controversy so far. The Gnostic account of Archon Anunnaki activities differs on many significant points from what is found in the Sumerian accounts. For one thing, Gnostics did not regard Archons as superior beings who jumpstart civilization. Nor did they consider the Archons capable of accessing the human genome called by them the Anthropos, although they did grant some role for Archontic activity in our physical evolution. This point is extremely difficult to clarify, however. By far the most striking difference between the Sumerian and Gnostic accounts is that the former contain no inkling of the Sophia mythos and no explanation of how the Archons, alias Anunnaki, originated. This is a considerable lacuna, to say the least. In his elaborate reworking of the Sumerian materials, Zacharias Sitchin describes the Anunnaki as a highly advanced non-human species who inhabit the planet Nibiru, an outrider of the solar system with a period of 3,600 years. In Sitchin's version of prehistory, the Anunnaki came to Earth in quest of gold for manufacturing a colloidal suspension needed to stabilize their atmosphere. For a full account, see Sitchin's last book, The Lost Book of Enki. Although Sitchin appears to be a legitimate Sumerologist with a profound grasp of ancient languages, no orthodox scholar endorses his scenario for the Anunnaki. At worst, it is dismissed as an ancient astronauts fantasy dressed up in scholarly robes. I am unable to say whether Sitchin's account of the Anunnaki on Nibiru is an accurate rendition of cuneiform texts or a fantasy extrapolated in his mind. Significantly, Sitchin never describes the physical appearance of the Anunnaki of either type. One of the great benefits of the Gnostic Archon scenario is that it does provide vivid descriptions of these entities. Is it a coincidence that the embryonic and serpentine Archons described in Gnostic texts present an identical match to the two kinds of ETs most frequently reported in modern times, the Greys and the Reptilians? If the Gnostics got this part of the intervention scenario right, what else did they get right? Cosmic cousins. The same manifestations that created our religious beliefs, created our UFO beliefs. A serious look at the phenomenon would cause a revision of our way of looking at religion. John Keel, UFO, Operation Trojan Horse. It is startling to find vivid and detailed descriptions of predatory aliens in obscure texts dating from the 4th century CE, but the revelations of Gnosis are nothing if not startling. Some ancient reports of UFO sightings do exist, but Gnostic material on the Archons does not merely present reports. It explains their origins in the cosmic order, their nature inorganic, imitative, without intentionality, their appearance and tactics, their attitude toward humanity, and more. A more clear and coherent solution to the phenomenon, the ET-UFO enigma, could hardly be imagined. The high strangeness of the Gnostic Archon material poses a credibility issue, of course. We are faced with the choice of believing that these texts represent an accurate account of what Gnostic seers observed in states of non-ordinary reality, that is, a reliable report of genuine parapsychological research achieved by remote viewing, lucid dreaming, clairvoyant observation, and then carefully assessed by non-ordinary reason, or believing that Gnostics were mere fantasists, mystics deluded by their visions, wacko cult weirdos, or worse. How, then, can we determine if the Gnostic account of the Archons was delusional or if it presents reliable knowledge of alien intervention? In Sources of the Gaia Mythos, I discuss the indigenous concept of the dreamtime, the timeless play of creative awareness in the eternal now, and its variant, dreaming. When the dreamtime comes to expression in particular knowledge and behavior, the Aborigines refer to the dreaming of the creature who embodies that knowledge and exhibits that behavior. For instance, the kangaroo dreaming is the summation of the innate knowledge and instinctual behavior of all kangaroos, going back to the dreamtime ancestors. One could say, in biological terms, it is the enactment of the genome of the kangaroo species. All creatures, organic and inorganic, human and non-human, live and die by the dreamings that play through them. In the Aboriginal worldview, the unique gift of humans to create culture stems from our capacity to remember and retell the dreaming, not only of our own species but of others as well. The indigenous belief that the role of humanity is to remember the events of the dreaming for all creatures accords with the suggestion presented in sharing the Gaia mythos. The human species enables a memory circuit for Gaia. To apply these ideas to the problem of the Archons, let's recall that we, the human species, are involved in a special way in Gaia's dreaming, which originates from the trimorphic protenoia, the threefold primal intention of the Aeon Sophia. Our proper boundaries are defined by the Earth-Moon-Sun Trinity, and our wisdom endowment unfolds, given by Sophia, unfolds within the unique conditions of the biosphere, the womb of Gaia. However, there is another dreaming that leaks into the Earth dreaming, rather like a wireless message that bleeds through into a conversation in progress on another frequency. Something extremely weird is happening on Earth due to a fissure in the human mind, and this fissure in turn arises from an anomaly in the cosmic order. The world system we inhabit came about by a mistake. The Gospel of Philip, NHC 2, 3, 75.1. The magical journey of awareness in which we co-evolve with Gaia's dreaming is deviated or distorted by an alien influence, so the Gnostics taught. On this recondite point they seem to have agreed with the Yaqui shaman Don Juan, who said to Carlos Castaneda, "Human beings are on a journey of awareness, which has been momentarily interrupted by extraneous forces. Everything we learn about the Archons teaches us something crucial about ourselves." The Gnostic theory of alien intrusion. Since the explosion of the ET UFO phenomena in 1947, speculation about alien intrusion on planet Earth has been rampant. Half a dozen theories dominate the debate, but there is one theory that has yet to be examined. It did not emerge after 1947, but approximately 1600 years earlier. To be precise, the evidence of this theory came to light through a discovery in Egypt in December 1945, although the significance of the find was not realized until, guess when? 1947. In that year, French scholar Jean Dorès identified the Egyptian find at Nag Hammadi as a cache of rare Gnostic texts. Gnosticism is the label scholars use for a body of teachings derived from the mystery schools of pre-Christian antiquity. Gnostics who protested against Christian doctrines such as divine retribution and Christ's resurrection found themselves targeted as heretics and were brutally suppressed by early converts to the one true faith. This is the untold story of how the mysteries ended. Since that signal year, 1947, some of the lost mystery school knowledge has been recovered. Gnosis, inner knowing, was a path of experimental mysticism in which the initiates of the mystery schools explored the psyche and the cosmos at large. Using psychoactive plants, yoga, and sex magic, these ancient seers experienced altered states and developed siddhis, occult skills such as clairaudience and remote viewing. Gnosis was a kind of yogic noetic science melded with parapsychology. In heightened perception, Gnostics developed a vast cosmological vision centered in a female deity, the divine Sophia. The Gnostic creation myth is unique in that it includes a full-blown explanation of how inorganic alien beings came to be present in our solar system. The Nag Hammadi material contains reports of visionary experiences of the initiates, including first-hand encounters with inorganic beings called Archons. Gnostic teaching explains that these entities arose in the early stage of formation of the solar system, before the Earth was formed. Archons inhabit the solar system, the extraterrestrial realm as such, but they can intrude on Earth. Interestingly, this Gnostic insight accords closely with the view of Jacques Vallée, who maintains that ET cyborgs probably belong to the local planetary realm. Vallée also proposes that the ET UFO enigma is a spiritual control system, a phenomenon that behaves like a conditioning process. Messengers of deception. This is exactly what Gnostics said about the Archons. They can affect our minds by subliminal conditioning techniques. Their main tactics are mental error, intellectual virus, or false ideology, especially religious doctrines, and simulation. Archons are predatory, unlike a wide range of non-human and other-dimensional beings also known to the Gnostics, beings who are benevolent or neutral toward humanity. Physical descriptions of Archons occur in several Gnostic codices. Physical descriptions of Archons occur in several Gnostic codices. Two types are clearly identified, a neonate or embryonic type, and a draconic or reptilian type. Obviously, these descriptions fit the Greys and Reptilians of contemporary reports to AT, or I should say, to an ET. Delving into the Gnostic materials, it is quite a shock to discover that ancient seers detected and investigated the problem of alien intrusion during the 1st century CE, and certainly well before. The mysteries date from many centuries before the Christian era. What is amazing about the Gnostic theory of the Archons is not only the cosmological background explaining the origin of these entities and the reason for their enmeshment with humanity, but the specificity of information on the alien M.O., describing how they operate and what they want from us. For one thing, Gnostics taught that these entities envy us and feed on our fear. Above all, they attempt to keep us from claiming and evolving our inner light, the gift of divine intelligence within. While I would not claim that Gnostic teachings on the Archons, or what remains of such teachings, have all the answers to the ET UFO enigma, one thing is clear: they present a coherent and comprehensive analysis of alien intrusion, as well as specific practices for resisting it. They are far more complete and sophisticated than any theory in discussion today. In short, the ancient seers of the mysteries in Europe and the Levant seem to have accomplished 2,000 years ago what many of us have been attempting to do since 1947, figure out who the ETs are, where they originate, how they relate to us, and most important of all, how we ought to relate to them. As far as I know, apart from myself, only one writer on the ET UFO issue has directly identified the Gnostic Archons with contemporary ETs. This is Nigel Kerner, whose book, The Song of the Greys, is a strange, singular and little-known contribution to the debate. Kerner cites the Nag Hammadi texts just in passing, and does not elaborate on Gnostic teachings about the Archons. He makes a strong case for alien interference with the human genome, but this claim does not stand up against Gnostic analysis. Gnostic texts use mythological language to describe actual events in prehistory as well as long-term developments in the human psyche. According to the ancient seers, Archons cannot access our genetic makeup, but they can fake an intervention. Considering the confusion of humanity in modern times, a faked intervention would be as good as real. This typifies the Archon tactic of getting us to imagine and believe things that are not true, and to accept simulation for reality. In this way, Gnostics taught, these alien cousins can deviate the human species from its true and proper course of evolution. The unique emphasis on the goddess Sophia is the high inspirational message of Gnosis. The ancient seers taught that, through a special link to the goddess, our species can overcome the Archons and secure a human, and humane, future for the Earth. The ET deception. Knowing who the gods are, and who are not gods. In my recent interview Thursday, February 16, with George Norrie for Coast to Coast AM, a listener called in a crucial question that I did not answer properly, due to the fast-paced, improvisational nature of the on-air format. Sometimes, in responding to a question concerning the complex subject matter of mythology, it is necessary to frame the answer carefully, but radio interviews do not allow time for this. In the following short piece I will have another try. Who are the gods? The listener asked me if the identification of the Sumerian Anunnaki and Gnostic Archons with modern ETs could be applied to other gods in different cultures, such as the Greek and Nordic myths. A great question, and absolutely essential for a clear and sober orientation to the perplexing issue of alien entities, visitors, ancient astronauts, gods in flying saucers, etc. I use 3 simple classifications for the various gods described in mythology and ancient texts: the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi codices, etc., and the entities reported in ET encounters and UFO sightings. The first classification is purely psychological. Some gods are not autonomous entities, independent of us, but projections of natural and intrapsychic processes. I call such gods psycho-deities because they manifest through our psyches. Even if they represent forces operating in nature, what happens in the natural world also impacts the human psyche, and permeates it, so, nature gods are also intrapsychic. For instance, in Nordic myth Wotan or Odin is a shamanic deity, or a deified shaman, who represents the power of higher seeing and the gift of divination. These are capacities that come to be embodied, or personified, if you will, in the figure of Odin. The capacities Odin possesses are paranormal, hence, godlike, both in the sense of being beyond the human norm, and in the sense of resembling faculties we might imagine superhuman beings to have. Yet, they are intrapsychic capacities, fully within our range of evolution. Or consider the nature god, Osiris, who was central to Egyptian religion. He represented processes of death and regeneration in nature, at the cellular level, hence a grain god, paralleled by other processes in the human psyche. As a dying and resurrecting god, Osiris does not stand totally beyond human reality. The psycho-gods are interactive within the range of our mental and sensorial experience. They are, in a sense, extensions and reflections of ourselves and other sentient creatures. Nordic mythology describes the celestial conflict between 2 generations of gods, the Vanir and the Aesir. The Aesir represent a class of gods, of a superhuman, cosmic stature. They are not psycho-deities but cosmo-deities, divine powers that pervade the cosmos at large. They produce and sustain the manifest worlds, without manifesting themselves. Of course, they also can reach into the human psyche, and enter our consciousness. They can go anywhere they like. Gnostics taught that the authentic cosmic gods, the pleromic divinities or aeons, do not invade and overwhelm us. They have excellent boundaries. They do not assume human form. They are not of this world, but they are not entirely inaccessible to this world, either. Cosmo-deities are the foundational and shaping forces of the manifest worlds, whereas psycho-deities represent our capacities to experience all that is so manifested. In Gnostic language, the cosmo-deities are the aeons, the pleromic gods are generators, as I like to call them. Pleroma means fullness, plenitude. In astronomical terms, the pleroma of the aeons is the galactic core, or hub. The opening episodes of the Gaia mythos present an attempt to describe the nature and activity of the aeons. I use a prose poem for this purpose, as awkward as that may be, because a literal description would be inappropriate. Between these 2 classes of gods is a third group, an ambiguous class of entities who are part psychic and part cosmic. They are called tricksters in anthropological studies and comparative mythology. Indigenous lore of the Americas is full of tricksters who interact with the native peoples, usually in a playful manner. There is a vast range of trickster entities that do no harm and harbor no intent to deceive. Their trickery is pure fun, or it may often be a way to instruct humans in survival, adaptation, and even self-knowledge. Many tricksters take the form of animals such as the rabbit, fox, crow, coyote, and so forth. These shapeshifting entities belong to the planetary habitat as much as we do. They are psychic, animistic powers of this world, close to the animal powers, recognized by all indigenous peoples as allies to the human species. The fairies and little people of Celtic folklore belong to this class. Indigenous wisdom teaches that we cannot fully know what it means to be human unless we show the humility to learn from non-human beings. Trickster entities also include the spirits of various species of psychoactive plants, fungi, and mushrooms. The niños are honguitos, the little ones, of Maria Sabina's, for example. Or the trolls seen in DMT experiences, reported by Terence McKenna and others. There is, however, a particular strain of the trickster-type entity that behaves in a different manner. It deliberately presents itself as a cosmo-god, having a divine status. This entity tricks us by pretending to be other than it is. Most tricksters do not act in this way, as you can see from a study of the indigenous lore. They may be shapeshifters, they may spin tall tales and perform all manner of clever illusions, but they do not pretend to be cosmic gods. Those who do present themselves as cosmo-gods, are creators, and so forth, could be called trickster gods. But this is a tricky term. We can call them trickster gods, not because they are true gods, but because they can be mistaken for true gods. These tricksters cannot be equated with the animistic type of trickster, nor are they psychogods. They can be identified by their deceptive tactics, their attempt to be taken for genuine cosmic gods. In short, they are pretenders, impostors who seek to imitate the cosmo-gods. I propose that they be called pseudo-gods. Such are the Archons described in Gnostic writings. Demiurge and Sophia. The ultimate impostor deity is Jehovah, the Father God of the Bible. This entity of the Lord of the Archons, our chief Archon Protarchon. Jehovah is a trickster god who pretends to be an aeon, a generator. When Gnostics explained this distinction, they were violently resisted and, in some cases, murdered by the devotees of the pseudo-god. Much violence has been done on this planet to protect the biblical pseudo-god from being exposed. In fact, Jehovah's agenda encourages and sanctions this violence, as any sane person can see from reading a few pages of the Old Testament. The pseudo-god needs to protect its identity and preserve its deception. To do so, it persuades its human devotees to fight in its behalf. This particular trickster god is extremely jealous and malicious. This explains why the three mainstream religions, whose followers take the pseudo-god for the supreme creator, are informed by an agenda of violence, aggression, and domination. We live on a planet where millions of inhabitants are caught in the deceptive spell of a pseudo-god. This was the Gnostic warning to humanity. Some writers on biblical ufology, see 9 Theories of Extraterrestrial Contact, which I discussed in the Nori interview, have pointed out that Jehovah acts like a murderous psychotic. Christian O'Brien, the genius of the few, is particularly astute in his psychological profile of the biblical Father God, and A.D. Horn, Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins, flatly asserts that Jehovah is a Lizzie, that is, a predatory reptilian. Horn does not cite Gnostic sources, but this is exactly what you will find in the Nag Hammadi materials. The Apocryphon of John Nhc 2:1 and other cosmological texts use the term draconic for Jehovah, or the Demiurge, as this pseudo-god is also called. The name given to this entity in the Mysteries was Yaldabaoth, Yaldabaoth. Roughly translated, this means, breeder of the hive, or horde. Now, an important distinction. I cannot say if there are malevolent trickster gods throughout the cosmos, manifesting in various worlds. The Gnostic teachings that survive do not cover this range of phenomena. Gnostic cosmology is specific to the conditions of our solar system and life on Earth. The seers of the ancient pagan mysteries observe that archontic entities are present in the solar system, but they are not native to the Earth as we are. They are literally an extraterrestrial and non-terrestrial species. As such, they are only capable of flitting into the atmosphere of the Earth in erratic ways, making brief forays, and then flitting out again. For them to remain on Earth, special conditions would have to be established, just as when humans set up an outpost on the Moon, or in the depths of the ocean. The Archon tricksters cannot live in the biosphere, just as we cannot live on the other planets of the solar system such as Mars, Jupiter, and Neptune. Gnostics taught that the Earth does not belong to the solar system, but is merely captured in it. As the Gaia theory of Lovelock and Margulis affirms, the Earth differs from the rest of the planets by the strange equilibrium of its atmosphere, providing not only a space for lifeforms to inhabit but an interactive medium in which life can evolve, adapt, and innovate. Such is the miracle of life on Earth, including the human species as part of an open experiment overseen by the cosmic gods, the Aeons. The Earth is a special case, as Gaia theory asserts, because it is embodiment of a cosmo-god, the Aeon Sophia, whose name means wisdom. On this planet we see wisdom incarnate, living, evolving, sentient, and we are part of it. Sophia is one of the cosmo-gods of the galaxy we inhabit. She emerged from the core of the galaxy, the pleroma, to become immersed in a planetary body. This situation is unique to our world. Mythologically, it is called the Fall of Sophia. To us, Sophia is the one aeon or cosmo-god who is directly, sensorially present. We live in her skin. Our cosmic mother is the aeon Sophia, whom we now call Gaia. But Sophia is also the mother of the Archons, the tricky pseudo-gods who want us to take them for aeons. Gnostic mythology extensively described on site and in my forthcoming book, working title, Not in His Image, taught that before Sopha morphed into the earth, she produced a kind of spatter in the realms of elementary matter, quantum foam, resulting in a weird species made of inorganic, silicon-based elements, the Archons. These entities proceeded to fashion a world for themselves, the planetary system exclusive of the Earth, which is Sophia's body and was formed somewhat later. The Archons are so named, from Greek archai, prior, previous, because they and their world were formed before Sophia morphed into the Earth. This is all quite a huge picture, of course. I do not expect anyone to digest it in one lump. But it is remarkable that seers in the ancient mysteries were able to establish this scenario. Take it or leave it, believe it or not. Personally, I believe this scenario is trustworthy and can be tested against the evidence. It explains the origin of the archontic ETs, both reptilian and embryonic or neonate types, the big-headed, bug-eyed greys, as no other theory can do. The value of the Gnostic scenario of the demiurge and his horde is that it gives us a framework for discerning various types of non-human entities, and detecting one predatory type of trickster god. I do not insist that these are the only predatory ETs in our galaxy. I know there are tales of many types, but the brutal fact is, one is enough to endanger our evolution. Following Gnostic teachings, I believe that the Archons are the most immediate and intimate threat to humanity. The insanity of God. Now, just a few more words on Gnostic cosmology, and then I will return to the question that prompted this brief essay. I often say that the Gnostic seers in the mysteries were adept at paranormal skills such as lucid dreaming, remote viewing, clairaudience and clairvoyance. If this is correct, they would have been able to observe the Archon pseudo-gods and discern their modus operandi. In fact, about 1/5 of the NHC concerns the origins, motives, tactics, and actions of the Archons. What those seers were able to determine about the predatory trickster gods may be crucial to human survival. I want to emphasize one aspect of their diagnosis of alien intrusion. Not only does Yaldabaoth pretend to be the supreme creator god, but he falsely believes he is just that. The chief Archon has a god complex. He is not only trying to deceive us, he is deceived. The pseudo-god is delusional, and his delusion infects all those who follow him, such as the shocking message from the ancient mysteries. The Gnostic assertion of the insanity of God must be one of the most astonishing concepts in human experience. But it is not isolated, not totally unique. In the madness of the ego I present a Buddhist parallel to the Gnostic demiurge. Read this scenario and see if it is not an exact equivalent to the Gnostic myth of the demiurge. Both narratives state that the pseudo-god mistakes himself for the creator of the entire universe. This, of course, is exactly what Jehovah does, too. Believers in the mainstream religions who take this delusional entity for their supreme being are themselves delusional. In blind faith, millions of people are enmeshed in the insanity of a pretender god and implicated in the violence and aggression of the Archons. The demiurge is an impostor deity who works against humanity. Yaldabaoth stands between humanity and the aeons in the galactic core, pretending to be one of them. The Archon horde, operating on a hive mentality, try to intrude between humanity and the Aeon Sophia, embodied in the earth. Thus they work against our innate wisdom, so closely connected to the intelligence of Gaia, in the vain attempt to deviate us from that connection. This is the diagnosis of the mystery seers. Double deception. Finally, in closing, I would like to return to the call-in on the interview with Garoj Nori. Is it possible, he asked, to discern ET Archons in other myths around the world? It is clear that the Sumerian Anunnaki and the Gnostic Archons are identical to modern ETs, but it is by no means easy to go through the massive material of myth and folklore and weed out every reference to the pseudo-deities. I have not done this, not completely or exhaustively, but I have made various attempts at it. I would like to report my investigations on another article on site. Meantime, there is one more crucial factor in the Dionysus. This concerns the double deception of the ET phenomenon. The phenomenon itself tricks us from seeing how it works. Since I have introduced the ET Archon theory on this site, there has been ever more excited talk about how the gods described in ancient myth were actually extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts. I am certain that factoring the Archons into this discussion can be extremely instructive. At the same time, the introduction of Gnostic counterintelligence on alien intrusion takes the discussion to another level. We now have to become more sophisticated in our understanding of the alien factor. When we today regard the gods described in ancient times as archontic ETs, we tend to think that we have finally understood who the gods are. This is not correct. In reality, we have come to see who the gods are not. In making the identification, Anunnaki equals ETs, for instance, we catch sight of the entities who pretend to be gods. In the Sumerian cuneiform record, which are transcripts of channeled materials, the Anunnaki claim to be our creators. But does the fact that something was written on clay tablets 2,800 years ago mean that it is true? Of course not. The Sumerian cuneiform record presents a claim that the Anunnaki are superior creator gods, not proof that they are. The cuneiform tablets are not evidence of facts, they are evidence of a story presented as fact. Here we are close to seeing the double deception. Having ascertained that the ancient gods were really ETs, we fail to ask, what about gods who are not ETs? The nature of the ET deception is, first, that it tricks us about the gods, and then, when we get onto the deception, it diverts us from looking beyond it toward the true gods, the divinities of the living cosmos. Having made the ET-God connection, we must take another step toward more sophisticated knowing. The same thing to do, then, would be to ask, if the Archon ETs were wrongly regarded as gods, who are the genuine gods? It would be a gross error to assume that we have understood the nature of the gods simply by making the ET connection to ancient mythology. Due to the double deception of the ET phenomenon, we tend to assume that ancient astronauts, who pretended to be gods and were taken as such, must be the only gods. With the Dionysus of the Archons, we are just on the threshold of discovering the true gods. This is a momentous shift. According to the Gnostics, the true gods are the aeons of the Pleroma. And one of these is Sophia, the wisdom goddess, who morphed into the planet Earth. Today we call her Gaia. She is the ground of life and consciousness for the human species and all sentient life, including molecular life. Such is the ancient pagan teaching preserved by the guardians of the mysteries. Today we stand at the threshold of reviving and reliving that teaching. The trick is to get past the extraterrestrial tricksters to the real magic of life on this earth. Christianity extraterrestrial religion. Reflections on von Daniken and biblical ufology. Note: this is an expanded version of the article, Abraham and the Doctrine of the Aliens, by John Lash, published on phenomenomagazine.com. In 1968 a Swiss innkeeper named Erich von Daniken published Chariots of the Gods, which became an international bestseller and remains in print today. According to von Daniken's sensational theory, ancient astronauts, from an advanced civilization visited the Earth in times long past. He found proof of their presence in rock carvings, religious artifacts, ancient myths, and, of course, megalithic monuments such as the Giza pyramids. Von Daniken provocatively asked, did God drive a flying saucer? With this question planted in the mainstream mind, God, angels, and everything biblical instantly attached itself to UFO speculation, but von Daniken did not explore these associations in a cogent or consistent manner. A less known but far more intelligent study, which appeared in the same year as Chariots, did just that. The Bible and Flying Saucers was written by Barry H. Downing, a Presbyterian pastor with degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary and the University of Edinburgh. The scope and depth of his book reflect his learning, a far cry from von Daniken's hokey shenanigans. But this book also reflects the author's steadfast faith in Christian tradition. Downing assumes that God and his angels, even if they are ETs who navigate in UFOs, are implementing a divine plan for the benefit of humanity. Note: I am informed that Desmond Leslie in his 1952 book Flying Saucers Have Landed, featured an entire chapter entitled, Chariots of the Gods. This is the source from which von Daniken borrowed both his title and much of the content for his book. Thanks to Sweeps Fox for this detail. Downing, along with Desmond Leslie, may be considered the founders of biblical ufology, the genre of studies proposing that many events in the Bible reflect extraterrestrial intervention, assumed to be benign. Visions such as those seen by Ezekiel are taken as close encounters. Angels, such as the one who announced the birth of Jesus to Mary, are regarded as aliens of a superior evolution. Some interpretations even regard Jesus as an extraterrestrial who comes to Earth from a more highly evolved world, or is cloned as a model human by technologically superior space brothers. Imagine the headline, Jesus, the first designer baby. Biblical ufologists assume that space aliens or ET-like entities act in a kind and benevolent manner toward humanity, consistent with the fulfillment of a divine plan. Downing wonders if biblical religion was planted and nurtured by persons from another world. He does not merely speculate on the presence of ancient astronauts on Earth, but he considers their possible role in initiating and directing the religious experience of humanity. This issue demands a much deeper cut into the human psyche than von Daniken undertook. Without the benefit of Gnostic materials, Downing was unable to conceive that biblical religion, planted and nurtured by persons from another world, works not for the betterment of humanity, but for its enslavement. Biblical ufology is widely developed today, but an optional interpretation that could not have emerged until some time after Downing and von Daniken wrote has yet to be considered. This option arises with the view of alien intervention proposed by the Gnostics of the mystery schools. Although some of the Gnostics' views can be found in obscure arguments written against them by early Christians, original Gnostic material was not widely available until the Nag Hammadi codices, discovered in 1945, were translated into English in 1978. The mysteries were destroyed in the 4th century CE, when the Nag Hammadi cache was buried, but they are known to have pre-existed Christianity for thousands of years. Gnostics were psychonauts of extraordinary scope and finesse. Their cosmology, centered on the figure of the goddess Sophia, presents a complete and coherent description of the origin and methods of an inorganic predatory species called Archons. Although Gnostic texts describe first-hand encounters with Archons who abduct souls by night, their teachings do not emphasize physical threat. Rather, they warn that the Archons affect us most profoundly in our minds, especially through religious ideology, through beliefs about God and what God wants for us. For mystery school instruction on facing and repelling the Archon ETs, see a Gnostic Catechism and the commentary on the First Apocalypse of James, Text 9 in the Nag Hammadi reading plan. One of the most sensational ideas of the Gnostics is that Jehovah, the Father God of Judeo-Christian religion, was an Archon, an inferior or impostor deity not to be confused with the true gods, called Aeons, who inhabit the cosmic center galactic core. Jehovah is said to be blind and mad, a demented alien who nevertheless has some godlike powers. Although he does not create the world we inhabit, he believes that he does. Opening his eyes, the chief Archon saw a vast quantity of matter without limit, and he became arrogant, saying, "It is I who am God, and there is no other power apart from me." The reality of the Archons, NHC 2, 4, 94.20. Of course, this is exactly what Yahweh Jehovah says in the Old Testament. Over and over again, the mystery teachings preserved in the NHC presents a view of Judeo-Christian religion that turns it completely inside out. Fortunately, the Nag Hammadi cache, meager as it is, contains quite a lot of clear information on the Archon god and his insidious tactics. In the second treatise of the Great Seth, an unnamed Gnostic master says, "The Archons devised a plan about me to release their error and their absurdity." This line recalls Jacques Vallée's pithy comment on alien strategies in Messengers of Deception: "The way to a man's belief is through confusion and absurdity." The text cited explains how the Archons induce a false plan of salvation into the human mind, a counterfeit of the true path of self-liberation we can take by developing our innate potential of nous, divine intelligence. The Gnostic teacher, called Foster or Illuminator, openly ridicules Abraham, Moses and the prophets for accepting the Archons as divine and putting faith in an impostor God who works against humanity. The second treatise says that the doctrine of the aliens is a great deception upon the human soul, making it impossible for humans to find nous, the self-liberating mind, and thus come to know true humanity. What Gnostics meant by the doctrine of the aliens is the ensemble of beliefs at the core of Judaic and Christian religion, and, by extension, Islam. All three of the great world religions derive from the revered patriarch Abraham, thought to have lived around 1800 BCE. Because the history of the ancient Hebrews is taken as exemplary or symbolic of humanity as a whole, our species' sacred history begins with Abraham, but Gnostics considered that Abraham was a dupe, the psychological vector for the intrusion of the Archons. In effect, they trashed the notion of a divine plan, overseen by Jehovah, and exposed Judeo-Christian salvationism, the Redeemer complex, as an extraterrestrial religion, alien to the earth and hostile to human potential. The Gnostic critique of the Redeemer complex was devastating to the cherished beliefs of many people, and still is, but the teachers in the ancient mysteries did not leave us without alternatives to these received beliefs. Gnostics taught what they embodied, the Illuminist path of experimental mysticism, contrasted to blind belief in salvationist dogmas. Against the religious deceit of the Archons, the second treatise invokes the hope of Sophia, affirming our bond to the wisdom goddess whose body is the earth. Kundalini and the alien force. Gnostic and Tantric practices of sacred sexuality. The exploration of Gnosticism may be one of the more revealing pursuits of our time, and it is certainly one of the more difficult. Since Gnostics were suppressed in the 4th century, disinformation about them has run amok. There is no clear and consistent presentation of Gnostic views, either in the slim surviving materials or in modern scholarship. To add to the confusion, Gnostics were initiates in the mystery schools, and initiates were bound by a vow of silence about many things they experienced, although not, fortunately, about all things. Body knowledge. One of the stickiest subjects in Gnostic studies is the question of sexual practices. Did they do it, or didn't they? By some accounts, Gnostics were ascetics who rejected the world as the fabrication of a pseudo-creator, Jehovah, identified by them as an alien deity or archon. It is now widely recognized that the accusation of world denial cannot fairly be laid on Gnostics, and more properly ought to be directed to Christian ideologues who falsely imputed hatred of the body to the heretics, thereby cleverly diverting attention from their own disgust for nature and human embodiment. One Gnostic scholar, M.A. Williams, has dedicated an entire book to refuting and sometimes reversing the disinformation about Gnostics, their views and practices. In Rethinking Gnosticism, he states that, far from despising the body, it is far more likely that Gnostics believed that, precisely in the human body is to be found the best visible trace of the divine in the material world. p. 117. His emphasis. From meticulous analysis of textual references, and line-by-line examination of the polemic writings of the Church Fathers against Gnosticism, Williams concludes that, the familiar clichés about Gnostic hatred of, contempt for, hostility to, the body fail completely as interpretations of what these sources overall have to say about the question. p. 137. Williams argues that Gnostics were deeply committed to healing themselves and others, and, far more optimistic about what actually could be done to transform somatic experience, than their opponents. p. 137. His emphasis. In the sacred art of Tibet, mating divinities are called Yab-Yum, mother-father, identical to the coupled aeons in Gnostic cosmology. In rites of sacramental sex, the partners imitate mating divinities, but they do not become gods. The purpose of the rite is to heighten pleasure to the level where it becomes the medium of cosmic consciousness. Vajraganta, mural painting, Gantz, 15th C. and Philip Rawson, Sacred Tibet, p. 51. By some accounts, which are usually condemnatory, Gnostics engaged in ritual orgies that involved the ingestion of sexual fluids as sacramental substances. By far the most scandalous account of this kind comes from Epiphanius 376-403 c, a heresy hunter who infiltrated the Ophite cult of snake worshippers. He reported that the Ophites venerate the serpent because God has made it the cause of gnosis for mankind. Ildebath, Gnostic name for Jehovah, the false creator god, did not wish humankind to have any recollection of the generators, aeons, the cosmic mothers and cosmic fathers on high. It was the serpent who, by tempting them, brought gnosis to our parents, who taught the first people of our kind the complete knowledge of the mysteries from on high. Cited in Jean Dorès, The Secret Books of the Egyptian Gnostics. Here, typically, Gnostic myth reverses Judeo-Christian tradition. The serpent in Eden is a benefactor, not a malefactor. How does such a passage stand against the Gnostics' description of sinister aliens, the reptilian Archons, who intrude on humanity? Are the predatory reptilians merely the shadow side of another snake-like force that acts for our good? A twisty issue, here. The answer would seem to lie in the true nature of sexual practices of the Gnostics. Magna Mater. There is no doubt that some Gnostic sects were ascetic and practiced total abstention from sexual intercourse. For example, there is the sect that produced the channeled material known as Books of Iou, Non-Nag Hammadi, a patchy collection of teachings on the afterlife. This Gnostic group believed themselves to have a sacred responsibility to preserve esoteric knowledge regarding the treasuries of the light, and the receivers, benevolent spiritual entities and guides we encounter when we die. The arcane material in the Books of Iou includes a brief condemnatory outburst against other sects who practice sexual magic. Apparently, continence was necessary for the keepers of Iou to know what they knew. This outburst of one Gnostic sect against another is unique in all surviving Gnostic materials. Apart from Williams's meticulous deconstruction of the world-denial anti-cosmic dualism, attributed to Gnostics, I have argued in more elementary terms that the Gnostic vision of life, being as it was centered on Sophia, the divinity embodied in the earth, could not have fostered or supported contempt for the material world, the realm of the senses, and the human body. Everything Gnostics thought and taught depended on direct communion with the goddess Sophia, whose name means wisdom. This was true for the mysteries in general, and for the Gnostic adepts in particular. Sophia was a cosmic version of the Magna Mater, the Great Mother worshipped in many ancient religions. Even the Church Fathers, who condemned Gnostics as world haters, affirmed that the mysteries in all their diversity were unanimous in the consecration of the initiates to the Great Mother. Historians of religion agree that pagan spirituality involved sacramental sexuality, orgies, rites of empowerment through sexual yoga. On the figure of Mary Magdalene as an adept of sacramental sex, see She Who Anoints. The Tantric sects in India present a close parallel to the Ophites, so close in fact, that the report of Epiphanius could be applied to Tantrics as well. Tantrics, or Tantrikas, as they are more properly called, are experimental mystics who arouse the serpent power, Kundalini, a force concealed in the human body, in order to achieve cosmic consciousness and awaken siddhis, occult powers. It is more than likely that Gnostics in their sexual orgies had the same aim. Clearly, then, the mythical serpent worshipped by the Ophites cannot be equated with the reptilian predators described in Gnostic texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls. More likely, the Ophite serpent is not entirely a mythical version of the Serpent of Eden, but is identical with Kundalini, the serpent power that resides at the base of the spine in human anatomy. This being so, sexual orgies among the Gnostics would not have been merely for the pleasure and indulgence, although they would not have excluded that, either. They worshipped the supernatural force that resided in their own bodies. In fact, the word, orgy, Greek orgia, means simply, working, activation. The orgia of the serpent power was a rite for activation of Kundalini in Tantric and Gnostic practices alike. The Gospel of Philip contains the scandalous passage that describes Jesus French kissing Mary Magdalene. It is also the one text from Nag Hammadi that gives the most explicit description of the sexual orgia, but in symbolic language, or insider jargon, if you will. The text asserts that all harm on earth is due to the conflict between the sexes, but this problem can be overcome by a corporal rite of reunion. See commentary by the translator, Wesley W. Eisenberg, in the Nag Hammadi Library in English, 1990, page 139 ff. The act of sacramental coupling occurs in a bridal chamber, called the nymphen, or perhaps it produces the nymphen. The ritual involves light, and Kundalini is also associated with a soft blaze of milk-white light that produces an electrical surge of ecstasy up the spine. The text explicitly says that the light veils and protects the partners joined in sacred sexual union. The alien powers do not see those who are clothed in the perfect light, and so they are not able to restrain them. By the rite of sacramental union, one is ensheathed in this light. Gospel of Philip, passage 70. Nymphen was a code term for the cell of light or protective aura generated by ritual intercourse. Within the cell, the initiates overcome the influence of the Archons who produce error in our minds, and threaten to take over our bodies, although it must be added that Gnostics insisted that threat of intrusion at the bodily level is exaggerated by the Archons themselves, to make us believe they possess more power over us than they actually have. One such error concerns resurrection. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing. Passage 72. This is core Gnostic teaching, stated in such a way as to refute Judeo-Christian beliefs on survival after death, beliefs held precious to millions of people today, but considered by Gnostics as delusional notions insinuated in our minds by the alien force, the Archons. It also sends a clear message about our ability to enter deeply into the biological mysteries of nature, for it claims that we can experience resurrection before we die. This assertion has many parallels in Asian tantric teachings, of course. In both Hindu and Tibetan traditions, yogis of high attainment are said to achieve complete regeneration of the body and resurrect themselves, hence, when they die, they did not die in a normal way. See, for instance, the legendary accounts in Masters of Meditation and Miracles by Tulku Thundeep. The more one considers Gnosticism in parallel to Shaivism, Hindu Tantra, Tantric Buddhism, and Dzogchen, the more likely it seems that some Gnostics were Mahasiddhis, yogis of high attainment, due to their mastery of the serpent power. The technique of psychosomatic illumination by raising Kundalini was not unique to Gnosticism, but it was certainly central to its practices. In Shiva and Dionysus, Alain Danilu draws close parallels between the Greek cults of ecstasy dedicated to Dionysus, and the Dravidian cults of Shiva worship indigenous to southern India. Citing Epiphanius' eyewitness account of Gnostic orgies, Danilu remarks that Gnostic teachings on sexual magic are very close to the idea of Shaivism. p. 223. Likewise, Sir John Woodruff, the great exponent of Hindu Tantra to the West, directly compares the Gnostic worship of the Magna Mater to Tantric adoration of the Devi Shakti, the Mother Power. He says that in the ancient mysteries, just as in the Tantric cults of India, the aim of sexual rites was to awaken the divine forces in the body. An ancient feature of this faith Tantricism, and one belonging to the ancient mysteries, is the distinction which it draws between the initiate whose Shakti is awake Pribhuta, and the Pashu, the unillumined or animal person, or, as the Gnostics called them, materialists. The natural, which is the manifestation of the mother of nature, and the spiritual, or the mother as she is in and by herself, are one, but the initiate alone truly recognizes this unity. Shiva and Shakti, p. 88. In this passage, Woodruff clarifies how the Aeon Sophia, identical to the Mother of Nature, is both embodied in the natural world and not so embodied, remaining, as she is in and by herself, because Sophia remains an Aeon of the Pleroma even though she has morphed into the planet Earth. Such statements do not come from intellectual speculation, but from direct experience of the very cosmic powers being described. Sex and death. In his account of Gnostic Shaivite parallels, Danilu describes the faculties of higher perception acquired by activation of the serpent power. These are called siddhis, sounds like siddhis, attainments, and those who attain them are siddhas, or mahasiddhas. The Asian siddha is the exact counterpart of the adept in the mystery schools. Adept comes from the Latin root, adipice, touch, gain, attain. Adept is closely related to aptitude, hence the adepts were men and women with special aptitudes. In the meeting of Mary Magdalene and Jesus in the garden on Easter morning, the Gospel writer has Jesus say to her, "Me mo aptu," usually translated as, "Do not touch me." But in a Gnostic reworking of that incident, he could as well have said, "You can see me, but cannot reach me, until you to have attained this state for yourself," if he were indeed a Gnostic master appearing in the docetic body, or phantom body, as some Gnostic teachers claimed. The phantom body of the Gnostics is called in Buddhism the Nirmanakaya. Describing the yogic attainments of the Shaiva Mahasiddhas, Danilu cites a tantric text, the Samkhya Karika. The yogi who has perfected the siddhas thus acquires powers like those which belong to the gods. These are essentially the power of vision and the power of knowledge, that is to say, omniscience, as well as the actional or facultative siddhas kriyashaktis, which are 9 in number. p. 94-5. Among the siddhas listed are the ability to see on the microscopic or molecular level, the power to transport oneself at a distance, and the power to read minds. The adepts of the mysteries would have attained these powers, and applied them to their work in teaching and training neophytes. Due to their specialist insight on the intrusion of the Archons, it is likely that Gnostics would have developed the powers required not only to detect the alien force, but to resist it. To prevent the Archontic pirates from capturing the body Ibid. Williams, page 137, they would have developed a whole range of defensive and immunological tactics. Modern studies of Kundalini emphasize its effects in boosting the immune system, or strengthening the human aura, in New Age terms. In Gnostic practices, an ecstatic encounter with divinity occurred in a kind of hermetic cell or sacred aura, called the bridal chamber, or nymphon. The Greek writer Pausanias, who was extremely cautious about disclosing any secrets relative to the mysteries, uses the word nymphon, so it does not appear isolated in Gnostic sources. Despite the elimination of countless documents, especially those that may have described sexual rites, there is ample textual evidence that Gnostic practices leading to divinization of the participants involved an act of sacramental sexual coupling in the nymphon. Now the light is the chrism, the anointing fluid. Passage 69 in Tibetan teachings, the ultimate mystical experience of white light occurs uniquely when we die, and only for a fleeting instant for those who have not previously attained the capacity to hold the light in their attention. But from Gnostic reports it appears that this experience could be achieved in more ways than one. Through sex and in death, alike. The Gospel of Philip celebrates the mystico-erotic union in the bridal chamber as the most holy of rites by which the initiates are begotten by Christos in the two. This act is rigorously distinguished from ordinary carnal intercourse. Whereas in this world the union is one of husband with wife. In the aeon the form of the union is different. This is possible because Christos came to repair the separation which was from the beginning, and unite again the two, and give life to those who died as a result of the separation. The Christos in this passage is not Christ of the Pauline and Johannine doctrines, not the incarnate Son of God. In Gnostic jargon, Christos is the aeon coupled with Sophia, her male cosmic counterpart. In Christian faith, the blood of the God-man, Jesus, gives life to humanity and heals our separation from the Father God, but to Gnostics these were delusional notions that imitate and distort the truth. In the Gnostic sexual sacrament, the bliss of the man and woman joined in sacred union is what repairs our separation from God, for the gods aeons, who are eternally blissful, are the source of body bliss as well. The rapture of the gods makes the blood stream in our veins. Uniting in sacramental sex, gives life to those who died. The alien force. If Kundalini is a biological force, as is widely attested in the writings of Western investigators such as Lee Sanala and Arnold Mindel, the other kind of serpent power may be distinctly antibiological. The Archons are said to envy humanity, for a number of reasons, but primarily because we live in the body of their mother. According to Gnostic creation myth, the Archons are a species of inorganic beings produced anomalously by the impact of the Aeon Sophia upon atomic matter, before the Sophia herself became transformed into the earth. They are called Archons, from archai, prior, from the beginning, because they arose before the earth and the solar system were evolved, but they did not emerge directly from the pleroma, as humanity did. On the emanation of Atu Kadmon, the Anthropos template, see The Promise of a Lonely Planet, Part 3, and the Gaia Mythos, Episode In their attempt to intrude upon humanity, which has been ongoing for millennia, the Archons use a lot of bluff and bravado. They affect our minds to get us to believe they can do far more than they can actually do, but in so believing, we unwittingly surrender our power to them. The result is, they get their way with us, because we have betrayed our own capacities. Hence the Archons claim to rule over humanity, and even pretend to have been our creators, as is recounted in the Sumerian cuneiform record of the Anunnaki, accepted as true by Zecharia Sitchin and many other sincere investigators. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 at the very moment the Nag Hammadi texts were initially recognized to be rare Gnostic materials, contain explicit accounts of direct threats posed by reptilians. For instance, the Testament of Amram. I saw watchers in my vision, the dream vision. 2 of them were fighting over me, saying, and holding a great contest over me. I asked them, who are you, that you are thus empowered over me? They answered me, we have been empowered and rule over mankind. And they said to me, which one of us will have you? And I lifted my eyes, and looked at one of them directly. His appearance was dreadfully frightening, and his skin was multicolored, darkly glittering scales. 4Q542. Note: the Watchers are consistently identified with the Anunnaki in modern ET alien speculation. As I have explained elsewhere in this site, a Gnostic sect called the Archontics was stationed on the Dead Sea south of Qumran. Gifted with powers of paranormal perception, such as remote viewing, Gnostic seers who had met and repelled Archons observed the persisting presence of reptilians among the Dead Sea cult of the Zaddikim. The first Apocalypse of James NHL 5th, 3, which contains descriptions of face-to-face encounters with the reptilian aliens, warns that Jerusalem is a dwelling place of many Archons. But the Gnostic teacher adds, a crucial insight, typical of the highly nuanced knowledge of the mystery school adepts: these powers are not armed against you specifically, but they are armed against each other. Passage 27. This line not only corroborates contemporary scenarios that describe conflict between the aliens who are among us, it also indicates that their powers are more engaged in battling each other than in overcoming us. Nevertheless, they have overcome us, in certain ways. Due to their subtle tactic of intimidation via false beliefs, the Archons can get us to surrender our power. To betray ourselves to them in the deepest way, in a terminal act of self-effacement, we would have to give up our bodies and surrender the hidden powers within our bodies. Gnostic initiatory practices were directed towards strengthening our embodiment by the arousal of Kundalini, which grounds us in the earth. Kundalini means the small ini, Kundala, serpentine or spiraling power. The big Kundala is the serpent power of the earth itself, the swirling erotic currents of Gaia. She, the Earth Mother, is the supreme ambient force that holds DNA configured in its spiraling chains of nucleic acid. When Kundalini is awakened in sacred sexual rites or otherwise, it grounds the human body consciously into the planetary body. This is the ultimate aim of Kundalini Yoga, not escape from the body, not deification of the participants, but grounding into Gaia, the Godhead of nature. In the Nymphin, Gnostics bathed in ecstatic luminosity which they considered to radiate from the Godhead, the Pleroma of Aeons, via the Aeon Sophia who is embodied in the earth. The absorption of these emanations effectuates sexual healing and repairs the split or rupture between the sexes, gender rift, that arose on the cosmological level when Sophia fell, shearing the Anthropos template. The cosmos is healed through what has been most deeply wounded, human sexuality. The Gnostic Succotash, Orphic ceremonial bowl showing 16 naked adepts, 8 men and 8 women, in a circle with their feet touching. The Sanctum of the Winged Serpent, Orphic bowl, 200 to 300 CE. The Aeon Sophia, acting without a consort, plunged from the Pleroma, but it is also Sophia, now, grounded, on Earth, who connects humanity to the cosmic source. The most direct and dynamic form of connection was effectuated in the ecstatic streaming of Kundalini during the sacred orgia. These rites were practiced to protect the circle of adepts, the Gnostic cell of 16 Mysti, shown above from the meddlesome pranks of the Archons. High Archontic immunity, high, is perhaps what we need today, facing as we do the ravages of HIV on the planet, not to mention sexual mores gone to rack and ruin. With unusual candor, Tobias Churton asserts that Gnostics thought, intercourse is good for your spiritual development. For it is by a kiss that the perfected hearts, the adepts, conceive and give birth. For this reason we also kiss one another. We receive a conception of our humanity from the grace found in each other. Spiritual love is all wine and fragrance. The Gospel of Philip. In the Gnostic version of the fall from paradise, there is no sin on the part of our ancestral parents. It is not humanity who falls, but Sophia, the wisdom goddess. The serpent in Eden is Kundalini, a sublime ally to humanity, not a tempter. In some Gnostic texts, the serpent power is called the instructor. Eve, the ancestral representative of the human species, acquires from the serpent ally the secret knowledge for the mysteries. It was the serpent who, by tempting Eve, brought Gnosis to our parents. 9 Theories of Extraterrestrial Contact. A brief inventory of the letting paradigms. These are categories more than theories. Within each definition a number of theories are possible. However, as categories, they do present a comprehensive overview of current ways of viewing the ET/UFO phenomenon, i.e., an inventory of the operative paradigms. Each category contains particular authors and researchers who fit with it, not a complete list, but just some suggestions. Some authors might fit into more than one category. For instance, Sitchin dominates category 3, but he could also go in 4, because of his reliance on biblical material, especially the life and activities of the patriarch Abraham, as well as in category 7, because some elements of his work are close to, if not identical with, von Daniken. There are close parallels, and some important overlaps, between categories 8 and 9. I exclude Star Trek, Star Wars spin-offs and sci-fi related material in books and film, which is massive. Also, I do not delve into reports of diverse and warring aliens, friends and foes. There are simply too many variations to cover. But in general outlines, these complex, multi-species scenarios will fall into one or more of the categories listed. All theories exemplify intervention theory, defined in the lexicon. This inventory is nowhere near complete, but perhaps it will provide a helpful provisional framework for discussion. Readers are welcome to send comments and suggestions to John Lash. 1. The extraterrestrial hypothesis. Aliens who belong to a technologically advanced civilization from somewhere in outer space made contact with the U.S. government, and others, perhaps in 1947, or earlier. The aliens cut a deal, offering to trade their advanced technology for the right to experiment with the population Corso, the day after Roswell. Source of innumerable conspiracy theories and nightmare tales of CIA mind control, cattle mutilations, underground labs, etc. Proponents: Timothy Good, David Icke, George C. Andrews, who carefully distinguishes between extraterrestrial friends and foes, and many others. This theory assumes that the aliens have an advanced interbreeding program, David Jacobs, the threat, and that their aims are not at all benign but downright sinister. 2. The benevolent Space Brothers hypothesis. Assumes various kinds of intervention, motivated by kind and helpful intent on the part of the aliens, or possibly as part of their program for boosting or initiating humanity to a more advanced level of consciousness. Most well-known example, Whitley Strieber's Visitors, and the Billy Meyer Pleiadian scenario. After much research and reticence, the late John Mack Passport to the Cosmos also adopted this view. Includes the earliest contactees such as George Adamski, whose tall blonde Venusians came to warn humanity about imminent self-destruction, pollution of the environment, etc. Earliest modern prototype for this theory, the Lords of the Flame, also from Venus in the Theosophical scenario of Madame Blavatsky. 3. The Sumerian file. Includes all theories centrally based on the Anunnaki scenario found in Sumerian clay tablets, the oldest written documents on Earth. Main proponent, Zecharia Sitchin, who maintains that the Anunnaki descended to Earth, founded civilization, and instituted theocracy. He also claims that these aliens come from Nibiru, the outermost member of our solar system, with an orbital period of 3,600 years, but this claim has not, to my knowledge, been astronomically verified. Spin-offs: Lawrence Gardner, Anton Parks, and many others. This category is unique in its reliance on ancient textual evidence. Compare to Category 9. The Anunnaki are space masters rather than space brothers. The Sumerian myth says they created humanity by genetic boosting of an ape-like native population, so that humans could serve as their slaves. 4. Biblical ufology. Includes hybrid and crossover theories that develop Category 2 specifically in the context of the Old and New Testaments. Draws heavily on apocryphal writings, especially the Book of Enoch with its famous account of the Watchers, believed to be fallen angels. Uses a straightforward and literal-minded equation between aliens and angels. Proposes that angels described in the Bible, such as those seen in the visions of Ezekiel, or the one who wrestled with Jacob at the Jabbok ford on the Jordan River, or the angel Gabriel who announced the birth of Jesus to Mary, were ET entities who are assumed to have a benevolent attitude toward humanity, consistent with the fulfillment of God's plan. Some of the angels may be fallen, but the leading assumption here is that the angel ETs are on the side of the Father God, and the Father God is working for humanity not against it, as the Gnostic theory, Category 9, asserts. Epitomized in the Raelian cult with emphasis on the genetic creation of humanity by God-like ETs. This category reflects the deep religiosity of ET UFO speculation, as well as its naivete and attraction to the divine parental image. In some rare instances, biblical ufologists approach the views of Category 9 and challenge the identity and motives of the Creator God, e.g., Christian O'Brien, The Genius of the Few, and A.D. Horn, Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins. These are both intelligent, sobering books. 5. The Mind Control Hypothesis. Largely developed by Jacques Vallée in a brilliant manner. He called the ET UFO phenomenon a spiritual control system. Equally so, John Keel UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse has explored this angle with sober and startling insight. Includes the influential writings of C.G. Jung. Also, Demonic Reality by Patrick Harper. ETs are projections of imagination, or the collective unconscious, intrapsychic phantoms, psychic shapeshifters, etc. The most intellectually sophisticated category, apart from 9, which incorporates it assumes that the phenomenon, as Keel calls it, is totally real, but not in the sense that it appears to be. It operates as a inboard control system, rather than a miraculous event or supernatural intervention. 6. New Age or visionary theories. Found in numerous versions which tend to proliferate wildly. Materials employed to develop this thesis are largely drawn from channeled writings. Examples are the Prism of Lyra and the Only Planet of Choice. New Age theories of alien contact tend to present a mixed bag of grand, starry-eyed plans and divine intentions involving a diverse cast of non-human species, some benevolent and some otherwise. 7. Ancient Astronauts, the von Daniken hypothesis, which has spawned a wide range of spin-offs. Take away all the smoke and ladders and this is simply a cargo cult interpretation of alien contact. Although von Daniken steered clear of these explosive issues, Swiss neutrality, the mystique of ancient astronauts attaches itself readily to the worst fringe element in modern thinking, i.e., crypto-fascism. We hear tales of Hitler escaping to South America in a saucer donated by his alien allies. Catastrophic theories of the Ice Ages and Hollow Earth fantasias proliferate in this category. For a good critique, see Jocelyn Godwin, Arctos. Bear in mind that von Daniken's artifactual and archaeological evidence has been largely dismissed as fraudulent and fantastical. We tend to assume that an advanced race would have advanced technology, but would it be that kind of technology, i.e., headphones and such gadgets? 8. Shamanic, indigenous, otherworld. The most traditional of all 9 categories because it draws upon worldwide folklore and mythology, for instance, the Aboriginal lore of Australia and the testimony of Zulu shaman, Credo Mutwa, who claims that the alien spirits are malevolent. Classic work. The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by E. A. Evans Wentz, which inspired Jacques Vallée, plus Valley's own Passage to Magonia. Includes the intentional production of living phantoms tulpas demonstrated in Tibetan Buddhism, Alexandria David Neal, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, Kachinas in the Magical Rites of the American Southwest, Frank Waters, The Book of the Hopi, and many reports from shamanic cultures, including ayahuasqueros of the Amazon and urban DMT trippers. Carried to a level of high sophistication by the Gnostic astronaut, Terence McKenna in his speculations on the UFO mushroom connection, the Archaic Revival. 9. ET Archon Theory, or the Gnostic Theory of Alien Intrusion. Specific to JLL and the Gnostic material on metahistory.org. To my knowledge, only Nigel Kerner, The Song of the Greys, is the only other author who equates modern Grey ETs with the Archons of Gnostic writings, but he does not develop this idea in depth, textually. Through metahistory.org I do just that. The ET Archon Navigator takes you to the relevant articles. This theory relies on the most solid and complete textual evidence from antiquity, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi codices. It assumes that Gnostic teachers in the pagan mystery schools were accomplished shamans who used paranormal powers such as remote viewing to detect aliens, as well techniques of psychic self-defense, to resist and repel them. About 1/5 of the surviving Gnostic materials are concerned with the ET Archons, their motives, methods, appearances, tactics, etc. Their most accomplished power is said to be HAL, simulation, substitution, i.e., virtual reality. They are imposters allied with the false creator God, the demiurge Jehovah, who is working against humanity. Kerner assumes that Archons have deeply penetrated our genetic makeup, but Gnostic writings support the view that they have only duped us into believing this is so, whereas they are in reality incapable of reaching or breaching the genomic intelligence we embody. Their victory lies in make-believe, getting us to act out what they pretend to be doing to us. Their work through insinuation. Gnostic cosmology is closely related to the modern Gaia theory of Lovelock and Margulis, for which it presents an ancient prototype. Gnostic writings explain the cosmic origin of the predatory ETs, both the fetal or embryonic and reptilian types, which no other theory can do. Our planet Gaia plays a key role in their presence in our minds and lives. The Archons are a spin-off of the intelligence of the divine being, Sophia, who is embodied in our planet, but they are not compatible with human intelligence, so they inhabit the solar system at large, apart from the Earth. This is the mystery teaching. Gnostics taught that the Earth does not properly belong to the planetary system, but is captured in it. Archons introduce a deviant skew into human evolution. Our responsibility is to detect and correct it. In this way we align ourselves with Gaia, the planetary intelligence that initially produced the Archon species. The Gnostic codices found in Egypt in 1945 warn explicitly that these predatory alien entities infiltrate our minds through spiritual belief systems. These systems, especially the Judeo-Christian Islamic program of salvation, are not entirely of human origin, but arise in our minds due to non-human deviance. Salvationism is an ideological virus of extraterrestrial origin. Jehovah is a demented pseudo-deity who pretends to be our creator. Gnostics detected the presence of ETs in the same forms reported today. The Nag Hammadi texts contain first-hand accounts of alien abduction. But at a more profound level, the ancient seers who guarded the mysteries also discerned the operations of the inhumane archontic mind in the religious ideologies that are today tearing humanity apart at the seams. A Gnostic Catechism. Encounters with aliens in a mystery school text. Here and there the Coptic Gnostic materials contain passages that describe encounters with the ET-like beings, sometimes with explicit advice about how to handle these entities. What beliefs are implied in such testimony? And what are we to believe about such testimony? I will attempt to address both these questions in this brief topical essay. Occult instruction. For a first-hand look at the testimony, let's consider a passage from the First Apocalypse of James NHC 5th, 3, a revelation dialogue in which an unnamed teacher, the Lord, or Master, confers secret knowledge upon a Gnostic named James. The Master said, James, behold, first shall reveal to you the path of your redemption. Whenever you are seized and you undergo death pangs, mortal fear, a multitude of Archons may turn on you, thinking they can capture you. And in particular, 3 of them will seize you, those who pose as toll collectors. Not only do they demand toll, but they take away souls by theft. Now, when you come under their power, one of them who is the overseer will say to you, Who are you, and where are you from? You are then to say to him, I am a child of humanity and I am from the source. He will then say to you, what sort of child are you, and to what source do you belong? You are to say to him, I am from the pre-existent source, and I am the offspring of the source. Then he will say to you, why were you sent out from the source? Then you are to say to him, I came from the pre-existent one so that I might behold those of my kind and those who are alien. And he will say to you, what are these alien beings? You are to say to him, they are not entirely alien, for they are from the fallen Sophia Achamoth, the female divinity who produced them when she brought the human race down from the source, the realm of the pre-existent one. So they are not entirely alien, but they are our kin. They are indeed so because she who is their matrix, Sophia Achamoth, is from the source. At the same time they are alien because Sophia did not combine with her like in the source, her divine male counterpart, when she produced them. When he also says to you, where will you go now? You are to say to him, to the place when I came, the source, there shall I return. And if you respond in this manner, you will escape their attacks. NHCV, 3. 33-34, 125. Translation from NHLE 1990, pp. 265-6 and Kurt Rudolph, Gnosis, p. 174-5. Considerable information is packed into this exchange. The resemblance to contemporary reports of close encounters is undeniable. The Archons induce a state of mortal panic, they often appear in threes, they perform abductions, take away souls by theft. These details present a striking match to contemporary ET UFO lore. But in an equally striking departure from the current literature, the Gnostic teacher gives explicit instructions on how to face the alien entities. The vast amount of testimony on the ET UFO phenomenon available today presents almost nothing on defense against alien intrusion. Contactees and abductees are passive witnessed, overwhelmed and overpowered by the aliens. But Gnostic writings not only describe such encounters, they also prescribe defensive action. The Master offers cogent counsel for keeping the Archons in their place. Gnosis is a remembering of our origins. The student is instructed to remember the cosmic birthright of humankind, and to affirm its direct link to the pleroma, the source. Specifically, the student is taught to recall and repeat the key episode in Gnostic mythology, the fall of the Aeon Sophia, and thus effectuate a defense against the Archons. By recounting the myth of their origins, the student demonstrates initiated knowledge of the origin and identity of the entities he is facing. Intentional recall of cosmic matters disempowers the Archons. This, at least, is a clear inference from the above passage. The tactic of remembrance accords closely with indigenous wisdom. Consider, for instance, the saying of the Na-Ki, a Tibetan people of southeastern China, one must relate the origin of the medicine, otherwise it cannot work its magic. Shamans heal, not only by their knowledge of the properties of plants, but also by their recounting the story of the plant. Likewise, Gnostics defeated the Archons with the medicine, occult power of mythological recall. The Coptic materials become increasingly relevant as we realize they do not merely present pedantic or recondite commentaries on a dead religion, but vital insights on the timeless spiritual dilemmas of humanity, insights as valid today as they were 2,000 years ago. Describing the find at Nag Hammadi, Tobias Churton writes, had Muhammad Ali not broken open the jar, we would not be able to hear these things. In the truest sense of the word, these things are dynamite. One might have imagined headlines throughout the world. The Gnostics, p. 12. But there were no such headlines, even in the tabloids. It took many years before the codexes were translated and still, even today, no scholar will allow that these rare Coptic codices contain reliable accounts of encounters with ET-like entities. ET Archon Navigator. Ideological virus. In another passage of the first Apocalypse of James, the Master refers to those people, who exist as the type of the Archons, 30:20. Gnostics were not only alert to the intrusion of the Archons, they were also acutely aware of the possibility of humans becoming totally archontized. This threat appears to have emerged in a particularly alarming way in that era to which Philip K. Dick often refers, the 1st century of the Common Era, when the incarnation of Christ is said to have occurred, according to Christian belief. Both the time and the place where archontic molding of human character set in strongly are specified in the Nag Hammadi texts. In his Gnostic view of the human condition, Dick assumed that the spiritual life of humanity was arrested at that moment. It is as if the behavior of those, who exist as the type of Archons, locked into place in that era, and came to dominate all subsequent centuries, until the moment in 1945 when the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered. In a close parallel to Philip K. Dick's vision of the Empire, Wilhelm Reich saw the rise of a similar syndrome which he characterized as the mechanico-mystical complex. See the mass psychology of fascism. Its signature is authoritarian ideology, the mindset of fascism and patriarchal domination. Significantly, archon was the common term for governor or authority in Roman times. In some translations of the Coptic materials, archon plural, archontoi is rendered as the authorities. Reich's analysis of what I propose to call the mystico-fascist complex focuses on National Socialism, the Nazi movement, which he experienced firsthand, but the mass psychology of fascism contains ample reference to Catholicism and the Holy Roman Empire, the millennial ancestor of the mystico-fascist program. For more comments on this subject viewed in a contemporary vein, see Armageddon Politics. In allusion to the fascist ideology of the authorities, Philip K. Dick wrote, "The empire is the institution, the codification, of derangement. It is insane and imposes its insanity on us by violence, since its nature is a violent one." Vallis, page 235, citing entry 41 from The Exegesis. This is purely a Gnostic insight, compatible with passages in the NHC and deeply resonant with Reich's views on the Massenpsychosen of Roman Christianity. It might be argued that the Nazis were not Christians, but in fact Hitler imagined himself as a Grail Knight, modeled after Wagner's Parsifal, and the savior complex of Judeo-Christian belief is wholly transposed into Nazi racial ideology, hence the Aryan Christ, identified, and, to some degree, embraced by C.G. Jung. The Holy Reich, published in 2004 by Richard Steigman Gall, professor of history at Kent State University in the USA, argues that Hitler was sincere in calling himself a Christian, and reveals to what extent Christian ideology was embraced by the Nazi Party and contributed to the advancement of their cause. Wilhelm Reich warned that since the breakdown of the pre-Christian ethos of earth-oriented paganism, the biological core of humanity has been without social representation. Ibid. P. She. This is a staggering observation, to say the least. The authorities exhibit the behavior of spiritual zombies, people who exemplify a baffling mix of mystical and militaristic fixations. What I have called behavioral cloning is widely evident in both militaristic and mystical behavior, such as we see today in neocon religious realpolitik, although it is also embodied in the mass conformity of global consumerism and the rights of technophilia. According to Reich, these fixations, focused on the master fixation on a transcendent God beyond the earth, arise from the repression and displacement of somatic sensations, especially sexual genital feelings. Philip K. Dick agreed with Reich in observing that the mystico-fascist ideology grows like armor around people who adopt these fixations, either through indoctrination or intimidation conversion. The mystico-fascist ideology operates like a virus, imposing its form on its enemies. Thereby it becomes its enemies. Vallis, p. 235. The ideology of the authorities can infect even those who resist it. Hence it turns humanity against itself. But it would appear that some Gnostics were immune to infection, not by accident, but due to their deliberate practice of orgiastic sexual techniques to produce immunity, and due, in equal measure, to their explicit teachings on the Archons and how to resist them, as seen in the above passage from the first Apocalypse of James. Gnostic observers on the ground when Christianity arose saw salvationist ideology exactly the way Philip K. Dick did, as a virus. An ideological virus, to be precise. Pagan intellectuals of the day even used that very term for the fanaticism of the converts. Gnostics saw the tyranny of belief, of metaphysical fantasies that underwrite militaristic agendas, in the rise of early Christianity. We can only imagine what they would see today in the political religiosity of the American right. Defending humanity. What are we to make, then, of Gnostic beliefs about the Archons? It might be said that Gnostics believed that only by confronting what is insane and inhumane in ourselves can we truly define what is human. In essence, to define humanity is to defend it against distortion. Gnostics asserted that the capacity for distortion of humanitas, or dehumanization, is inherent in our minds, but this capacity alone is not potentially deviant. Since we are endowed with nous, a dose of divine intelligence, we are able to detect and correct distorted thinking. We can master what Tibetan Buddhists call krolpa, thoughts that lead astray, mental fixations that turn us away from humanitas, our true identity. However, Gnostics also warned of an alien spin that can add a truly deviant element to our thinking. The effect of the Archons is not to make us err, but to make us, largely through dullness and distraction, disregard our errors, so that they extrapolate beyond the scale of correction. The Archons cast a trance over Adam. They put him into a sleepy state, but it was his perception they dulled. They make our hearts heavy that we may not pay attention and may not see. So we lose the reflection of the divine light within us. Thus the Archons acted on humanity with a view to deceive. When the life spirit increases and the illuminating power of the body strengthens the soul, no one can lead you astray into the lessening of your humanity. But those on whom the counterfeit spirit preys are alienated from humanity and deviated. The despicable spirit gains strength by leading us astray. The Archons burden the soul, attracting us to works of evil, and pull us down into oblivion, making us forget who we are. The Apocryphon of John, 2, 22:14-10, through 27-20. The Catechism on Alien Encounters in the First Apocalypse of James is not exceptional. A great deal of Gnostic teaching was dedicated to the theory of error I have just summarized. In a practical sense, Gnostic teachers in the mystery schools instructed the neophytes in how to face the Archons both as alien intruders, comparable to the Greys and Reptilians of contemporary lore, and as tendencies in their minds. The detection of archontic intrusion in both these modes of experience seems to be unique to the finely nuanced noetic science of the mysteries. In the Gnostic view, human beings, who exist as the type of the Archons, are those who blindly follow religious ideologies of an insane and inhumane nature, for it is primarily through religious beliefs that the Archons intrude upon us. Behavior driven by such beliefs produces pathological personality fixations, resulting in the spiritual zombie. All scholars agree that some Gnostics condemned equally the Jewish origins of the Christian Salvationist program and the Pauline-Johannine program itself. Doing so, they did not spread a hate message against anyone. Rather, they attempted to expose what they perceived to be the hateful and deceiving message disguised in the Judeo-Christian ideology of salvation. At the source of this message, they detected the subliminal intrusion of the Archons into the human mind. Hence the thrust and preponderance more than half of all surviving material, by my estimate, of politically and theologically incorrect passages in the Coptic materials. Whether or not Gnostics were delusional about the Archons is a private judgment call. But a fair and open-minded reading of the Coptic texts will not yield much evidence for derangement on their part. The seers who exposed derangement were not deranged. They were sober and methodical in describing what they knew, and extremely conscientious in prescribing action to face the perceived threat. They believed that they really had identified that most baffling of all enigmas, the root cause of inhumanity in human nature. What are we to believe about all this today? There is an issue of credibility here, of course, that is to say, we may consider the source of Gnostic teachings apart from their content. But Gnosis is by definition a matter of knowing and not a believing. It is about enlightenment, not faith. To give Gnostics credit for actually knowing what they claim to know is only the first step. Beyond that, we must confirm what they knew by our own resources, our own faculties. This is the perennial challenge of Gnosis, the living, ever-renewing cognition of the human spirit. Knowledge of that which is alive can alone banish terror. Wilhelm Reich, The Function of the Orgasm. The Promise of a Lonely Planet. Gaian Cosmogenesis and the Origin of Alien Life. According to Gnostic teachings. 1. Star Birth and Simulation. 2. the Passion of Sophia 3, the Shishta. Indigenous Cosmology with Sun, Sophonic Eagle and Yonic Earth. Huichol Yarn Painting. From Plants of the Gods by Richard Evans Schultz and Albert Hoffman. 1. Star Birth and Simulation. Several texts in the Nag Hammadi collection describe the cosmic origin of the Archons. The most complete version is in the Apocryphon of John, found in 3 drafts in the NHL and also in a non-NHL source, the Berlin Codex. In the Scholar's edition of the complete NHL in English, all 4 versions are printed in parallel, arranged in 2 columns on facing pages. The story of how the Archons arise in the cosmic order, due to the precipitous plunge of Sophia, and how they intrude upon humanity is not told in great detail, but it is told adequately. The Apocryphon of John also describes the aims and tactics of the Archons, the way they act relative to humanity. A keyword for this activity might be intrusion. In the language of comparative mythology, this situation constitutes an intervention scenario. As Gnostics saw them, Archons properly belong in the extraterrestrial realm of the planetary system exclusive of the Earth, and so they are intruders in the biosphere. The threat of archontic intrusion into the human realm is clearly stated in the Sophonic origin myth. Yaldabaoth, the head of the Archon hordes, did not obey the place from which he came. The Apocryphon of John, 12:10, cited in Alien Dreaming. This problem is inherent to the foundational story of our species. Both, and we, also, are like the Archons, subject to the same cosmic principle of self-regulation. If we, as a species, do not obey the place from which we came, we risk losing our place in the cosmic order. Gnostic teachings on the Archons are beautifully conceived so that at no point can we blame the Archons for what we do. Nevertheless, the Archons do exist independently of us, and do exert a significant influence on our behavior and outlook. They are both aspects of our mentality and independent alien entities. The both and proposition typifies the noetic finesse of Gnostic wisdom. The Sophonic origin story is a narrative of events, a cosmological script as such, while the interpretation of how the Archons affect humankind is commentary, a diagnostic treatment of the story and, to some extent, an extension of it. Unlike the origin story, Gnostic views on archontic intrusion are not found in any single text, and even where they are found, they are often garbled and incomplete. Nevertheless, the main outlines of intrusion are clear enough. Metahistory.org contains numerous passages on the ET-UFO enigma, treated in the perspective of Gnostic teachings. Here and there I equate the Archons with contemporary ETs, those, alien, entities who seem to flit in and out of our world, particularly the Greys and reptilians widely associated with UFO sightings, encounters, and abductions. There is, as everyone knows, a vast mythology developing about these entities. My aim here is to show what is unique in the Gnostic story of the Archons and analysis of their activities. In this essay I would like to summarize the cosmological narrative, the Sophonic origin myth with emphasis on the Archons as alien lifeforms. In a companion piece, How We Are Deviated, I profile the Archons more closely, with the aim to elucidate their motives and tactics, as described in various Gnostic texts. A cosmic abortion. The central event in Gnostic cosmology concerns the Aeon Sophia, a divinity in the pleroma astronomically speaking, the core of our galaxy or any galaxy. In the scenario of the fallen Sophia, the Aeon plunges from the cosmic center and produces a massive perturbation in the realms of elementary matter, the encircling limbs. This mythological event may be envisioned in a way consistent with modern cosmological physics. The erratic surge of a plasmatic stream from the galactic core excites the elementary matter in the limbs, producing a spate of inorganic lifeforms. They are called Archons, from the Greek archai, prior, from the beginning, because they arise first, before the Sun and the planetary system as a whole. Archons are humanoid creatures of inorganic composition, but alive and aware in their own way. Their first habitat is the region where the galactic limb has been impacted by the shoot of plasma from the core. Astrophysicists now surmise the existence of such shoots by the evidence of thread-like tunnels extending from the core, or central bulge, into the limb structure. This agitation occurs in the region of Orion, the most well-known and easily recognized of all the starry constellations. The archontic entities produced are of two types, neonate or embryonic, resembling the human fetus, and draconic, resembling reptiles or lizards, but still humanoid. The rudimentary forms of these entities can be traced in fractal patterns around the Mandelbrot set. See alien dreaming. Gnostics called this event the generation of the Archons, or the generation of error, because they equated the Archons with the human tendency for error, a curious trope, to be explained below, concerning the Gnostic theory of error, and in the profile of archontic intrusion in how we are deviated. In a bizarre image, the fractal Archon generation is compared to an abortion without any power of its own. Like a shadow, it came into existence in a vast watery substance. And Sophia hovered over the chaotic matter, which has been expelled like an aborted fetus. On the Origin of the World, 99, 5-10, 20-25. The Gaia mythos describes how the Aeon Sophia is stunned by the spontaneous generation of these entities, for this event was not foreseen in her, dreaming of a world system out there beyond the pleroma. The Archons arise from the impact of a deific force field that automatically configures the chaos of the raw elements, the dema, rather in the way a sound current configures fine sand on a flat surface, the Chaldni forms, or a magnet configures iron filings into a graceful rosette. This pattern-forming dynamic is the autopoiesis of the gods, great living currents that surge through the dreamtime. The Archons emerge first in the neonate form, and then a further mutation, tail dropping, produces the draconic type. The Apocryphon of John describes how the Aeon Sophia hides the chief Archon in a luminous cloud, so that the pleroma does not see the abortion she has unwittingly produced. With this image, the mythology points directly to an event described in modern astrophysics. The birth of the Sun. In modern astrophysics, the Sun, the central star of our planetary system, is said to have been produced by an explosion in the interior of the Orion Nebula. In the area mythologically pictured as Orion's sword, or the phallus of Osiris, is a dense molecular cloud, a cradle of star birth. The Sun was literally ejaculated from this region. The stellar explosion has two effects. It propels the newborn Sun on a trajectory upstream in the third galactic limb, and as the Sun advances, its spinning motion acts like a turbine, pulling elementary matter into a vortex. The vortex gradually flattens into the protoplanetary disk. According to the current model of solar evolution, this disk is to be imagined as an immensely wide, flat ring composed of elementary matter with the Sun, roaring like a blast furnace, positioned at its center. Gradually the raw elements separate, and the ring differentiates into bands of agglomerated particles that condense into individual planets. The conditions of this process are such that, just by chance, the Earth evolves from a density band located at a unique position, neither too far from the Sun, not too close to it. This location affords the precise conditions needed for the development of the biosphere. The conditions required for organic life do not arise from the other bands. Such is the modern cosmological narrative, but the Gnostic mythos of planetary evolution differs on a few key points. Gnostic seers who observed the cosmos at large saw all events as part of the ongoing miracle of consciousness. They realized that the power we possess to be aware of the cosmos is not a unique subjective property of humans but belongs to the very dynamics of the universe. Hence, they regarded everything that happens, out there, beyond the Earth to be an expression of awareness and sentience operating in higher dimensions. To them, the explosion of the Sun in the Orion Nebula was an event witnessed and felt by cosmic powers, even by the Sun itself. In their visionary replay of that event, Gnostics used mythological language to describe the emergence of our planetary system as if it were a sentient process, felt and witnessed by cosmic presences, but for the seers who developed this myth, as if, was, as is. They did not anthropomorphize, falsely projecting human qualities into a non-human world, but they attempted to describe the sentient, self-aware qualities of the cosmos at large. Gnosis is living knowledge of a living universe. In the Gnostic scenario, the eruption of the Sun in the Orion Nebula is an event beheld by the Aeon Sophia and the legion of Archons she has produced due to the premature side effect of her impact. At first the archontic entities are merely ripple-like formations in the dense elementary matter arrays, the dema, the chaos of atomic and subatomic particles. They are initially formed like crinkled filigree on a skin of metals, but when the Sun erupts in the Orion Nebula, it exerts a powerful vortex effect upon them. The material of the emergent Archons becomes organized around the spinning solar vortex, then flattened into a vast rotating plate that differentiates into distinct bands. Here the description follows current theory. None of this happens without awareness, however. The cosmos in formation is witnessed and sensed by the powers forming it. What is the instrumentality for this act of witnessing, the organs for sensing on the cosmic scale? I would say it is a cluster of resonant shells, rather like the higher dimensional structures proposed in string theory. As the protoplanetary disk forms, the Archons are absorbed into it. They are inorganic beings whose physical composition matches the inorganic chemistry of the planets, apart from the Earth. As the disk develops, the chief Archon, the reptilian type called Salkas, Samael, or Yaldabaoth, witnesses its formation and erroneously assumes that he is the creator of the emergent system. It is as if the chief Archon sees himself mirrored in the emergent solar disk, and then takes that system as his product. Opening his eyes, the chief Archon saw a vast quantity of matter without limit, and he became arrogant, saying, "It is I who am God, and there is no other power apart from me." The hypostasis of the Archons, 93:23. This is the primordial error of the archontic mentality, to mistake the witnessing power for the power to form what is witnessed. Hence, the emergence of the Archons, a cosmological event, is intimately identified with the generation of error, a noetic event. Cosmic noetic parallelism is a mark of Gnostic visionary science, as I have elsewhere noted. However, it is not entirely unique to Gnostic teachings. It also occurs in Buddhism. In The Insanity of God, a Buddhist cosmological narrative forthcoming in Believe It or Not, I consider a rare Buddhist creation myth that presents an exact counterpart to the Gnostic scenario of the Lord Archon, Yaldabaoth. E.T. Archon Navigator. Simulated order. Assuming the arrogant pose of a solar deity, Yaldabaoth falsely believes himself to be the only god in the entire cosmos. Thus, for Gnostics, the identification of Yaldabaoth with Jehovah of the Old Testament, a deity who suffers from this very complex of cosmic egotism, is a foregone conclusion, prefigured in the Sophonic origin myth. Being blind, he cannot perceive the pleroma galactic core, nor does he recognize Sophia, the cosmic current that surged from the core and produced him in the first place. He becomes infatuated, bloated with grandiosity, causing Sophia to feel shame and want to hide him from the sight of the pleromic aeons. She cast him away from her radiance, so that no one among the immortal ones might see him. She joined a luminous cloud with him, and placed a throne in the middle of the cloud. Epoch John BG 38, 1-10. The Aeon Sophia is that cosmic current whose impact organizes the Dema and produces the Archons. This happens because she acts unilaterally in her plunge from the galactic core, but Sophia does not unilaterally cause the birth of the Sun. This is a process continually occurring in the galactic limbs, due to the physics of the limb structure itself. In an action that might be compared to a mill wheel grinding stones, the galactic armature churns and refines elementary matter, constantly producing starbirth, the promise of new worlds of experience. The key to the unique status of our planetary system is the convergence of Sophia's impact with the nebular expulsion of a newborn star. The material of the Archons is incorporated into that material vortex that forms around this star, and Sophia herself fixes the chief Archon centrally enthroned, in the center of the protoplanetary disk luminous cloud. Overseen by Yaldabaoth, the Archons now proceed to fabricate the planetary system from the inorganic elements of which themselves are composed. As they have no intentionality enoia and no creative capacity epinoia of their own, they can only do this by imitation. The Apocryphon of John 2:10, 24-25 describes how the Lord Archon produced for himself cyclic worlds orbiting bodies from the luminous spark that still shines in the sky. Thus, he draws upon the vortex power of the central star, the newborn sun, to organize the matter swirling in the protoplanetary disk. Yaldabaoth originates nothing, however. He can only copy the model of the pleroma, without even knowing that he does so. And he was amazed by his own arrogance, for he seemed to beget material powers exousiae, authorities, out of his own solitary power, but after the patterns of the imperishable aeons. And so there came to be a stereoma firmament, corresponding to the cyclic formations of the pleroma. 2, 10, 26-28, and 12, 25. Gnostic teachings constantly emphasize that the Archons are imitators who cannot produce anything original, yet they arrogantly claim they can. The Lord Archon is called antimimon pneuma, counterfeit spirit. Apoc John 3, 36, 17. The term occurs several times in different texts. The cosmos he produces is described by the Coptic term hal, simulation. The vast planetary system of the Archons is a stereoma, a virtual reality projection in simulation of a higher dimensional pattern. Typically, the archontic framework of the planetary system has been depicted by armillary bands that surround the Earth. Illustration from Acellarius, Harmonia Macrocosma, 1660. Taken in many esoteric systems, Hermetics and Rosicrucianism, as the preeminent image of cosmic harmony, the model of the planetary spheres reflects a mindless imitation of divine design, not the living reality of the cosmos. Yaldabaoth, the presumed almighty creator god, really creates nothing, instead, he copies from archetypal patterns in the pleroma. The planetary stereoma of his making is like a plastic copy of an abalone shell. Only someone who does not know the reality of the abalone shell, and what living miracle of nature is required to produce it, would accept the plastic substitution. Here again, the cosmic noetic parallel applies. Archons simulate in the cosmos at large, and they also simulate in the human mind. This is a key indication of their effect, a clue to their subtle intrusion tactics. The main cosmological texts in the NHL, On the Origin of the World, The Hypostasis of the Archons, and the Apocryphon of John, are consistent in describing how the solar system arises as an inorganic simulation of the living pattern of the eternal aeons. Here is further insight into the generation of error. One might be excused, but just barely, for mistaking plastic for pearl, but it would be terrible ignorance indeed to be unaware that it takes an entire ocean and a living, symbiotic biosphere to produce a pearl. Yet such is the ignorance of the Archons that they cannot comprehend the living miracle of divine order, rooted in the pleroma, even when they are imitating it. The stereoma of the Archons is truly a grandiose accomplishment, rather like the many-roomed Venetian palace of a mafia don afflicted with religious grandiosity and a militaristic sense of the command chain. Now the prime parent Archigantor, the master breeder of the Archons, since he commanded vast orbiting worlds, produced heavens for each of his offspring. Beautiful dwellings, and in each heaven Yaldabaoth produced glorious decor, 7 times excellent, thrones and mansions and temples, and also chariots and celestial virgins. Consigning to each one its own heaven-like realm, and providing them with mighty armies of gods and commanders and messengers and overseers, in countless myriads, so that they might all serve and be served. On the Origin of the World, 19. Readers familiar with the archetypal psychology of C.G. Jung will recognize in this passage all the elements of the heaven archetype common to the mainstream religions: heavenly mansions, celestial armies, cloud chariots, virgins on order, choirs of angels arranged with military precision. The stereoma is loaded with spiritual kitsch. If anyone needs evidence of how the Archons can infect human imagination, here it is, 7 times excellent. Divine deceit. It may come as a shock that so much of what human beings have imagined as heaven is an archontic fantasy, or would be so regarded by Gnostics. It is rather as if our idea of heaven, the realm of the afterlife, were based on a Disney theme park. There is indeed something Disney-esque about the Archons, and there is in turn something distinctly archontic about the Disneyfication of our world. For some astute observations on this point, see Jerry Mander, In the Absence of the Sacred, under suggested reading for technology. It is worth noting that Walt Disney began to reach the mainstream in the early days of American television with remarkable films on nature, such as The Living Desert. At a certain moment, however, Disney turned from nature to fantasy. He proposed that the construction of Disney World in Anaheim, near Los Angeles, be overseen by a team of Imagineers. The result is that some people today who visit Disney World are so impressed by the simulacra, they cannot tell if the hippos in the river are real or artificial. From a Gnostic viewpoint, Disney might be accused of the error of Yaldabaoth. He did not obey the place from which he came. Rather than stay within the boundaries of nature, and learn from what is to be observed there, he decided to make nature over in simulation. This is exactly what the Archons did by imitating the pattern of the imperishable aeons. But consider the results. Whether we are considering heaven or Disney World, we are confronting the effects and artifacts of human imagination, as well as of archontic imagination, the genius of artificial intelligence. The simulacra of the Archons can so convincing that we fall under the spell of believing that the entire planet can be turned into a technological theme park, and even believing that such a world would be better than the one we already have. Such beliefs are typical of the archontic subterfuge that Gnostics detected, first, in their visionary survey of the cosmos at large, and second, in their astute observations of how human behavior is driven by religious fantasies and delusional beliefs. E.T. Archon Navigator. Elsewhere in this site I have cited the master principle for the great work, stated in the Theatrum Rosarium, a compilation of alchemical lore from the 17th century. In all thine operations, let the work be guided by nature, according to the slow progression of metals in the bowels of the earth. And in thine efforts, be guided in all ways by the true and not the fantastic imagination. Fine words, these. But how can we tell the true from the fantastic imagination? The language of the alchemical principle states in the first part of the formula what must be assumed in the second: true imagination follows nature, false imagination deviates from it. This deviation is the signature of the Archons, but it is typically human, or, I should say, typical of our species' arrogance, to presume that we can imagine a world better than the one nature provides. And even if we do improve on the natural world, we ought to do so with alchemical rigor, making sure that what we invent is based on close observation of how nature works. Alchemists collecting the morning dew. Mutu's Liber, The Silent Book, 1677, La Rochelle.